Chapter 1067. So he was trying to save her, and not because he was jealous of Jiu Xian. Her heart felt like it was being pricked by a needle. I'm sorry. She was about to say a few words of apology, but her eyes inadvertently looked inside, and her face suddenly changed. That fiery red swamp was still rapidly expanding. It seemed like it was going to merge with the lava river. The crystals and flowers on the shore were all swallowed by the swamp, and they could no longer be seen. Now, they were moving closer to the few ice flame flowers on the shore. Heavens, these flowers were hard to find. If they were swallowed, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens if they wanted to find other flowers. Heavens, ice flame flowers. Yang Ziyuan screamed. Don't move, I'll go pick the flowers. Yi Feng quickly instructed her. His body moved, and like a bolt of lightning, he flew towards the few ice flame flowers. You! Be careful. Yang Ziyuan could not help but call out. Yi Feng's figure slightly paused, and he looked back with a gentle smile. I know, don't be afraid. Yang Ziyuan only saw Yi Feng's figure flash, and he flew above the ice flame flowers. The moment he plucked the flowers, a huge fire dragon covered in dark magma patterns instantly jumped out. Yang Ziyuan instantly opened her eyes wide. What kind of monster was this? Dragon? No, this monster had a dragon's head, but its body was like a giant lizard. It looked as big as a house, and was abnormally fierce. Its pair of flaming eyes stared fiercely at Yi Feng, and it raised its head and let out a low roar. The sound it emitted was very strange, and Yang Ziyuan only heard a series of beastly snoring sounds. On the other hand, Yi Feng's face flushed red for a moment before turning slightly pale. This was the legendary Magma Fire Dragon, Earth rank level 9. It was said that this beast could already summon the wind and rain, move mountains, and fill seas. As long as it broke through Earth rank level 9 and entered Heaven rank level 1, it could turn into a golden dragon and soar above the 9 heaven. This beast was almost as famous as the Cheong Qi, Swan Ni, and other ancient beast. No one dared to provoke it. Once it pestered you, it would not rest until you were dead. Even if Yi Feng was at his peak, he might not be able to defeat it, not to mention that he had already used up more than half of his telekinesis. In this state, he was even less of a match for it. The magma dragon's roar just now was a special kind of sound wave. Humans could not hear it clearly, but as sharkmen, he could receive this kind of sound wave. The lethality of that sound wave was not small, shaking until the blood in his entire body churned. The sound waves emitted by the magma dragon were obviously a warning. It was asking him for the 3 ice flame flowers. Yi Feng took a step back and put the 3 ice flame flowers into his bosom. This flower was hard to come by, so he definitely couldn't give it to this dragon. Magma Dragon understood the meaning of Yi Feng's body movements and immediately became furious. With another long roar, it paused and rushed towards Yi Feng with countless flames and hot winds. If Yi Feng escaped by himself, with his speed, he might be able to escape from the Magma Dragon's pursuit. However, his and Yang Ziyuan's escape route had been blocked by the large rock that appeared out of nowhere, so he could only escape to the dark passage on the other side of the Magma River. But now that he had Yang Ziyuan by his side, he couldn't bring her across the Magma River. And once he escaped into the passage where Yang Ziyuan was, the Magma Dragon would definitely chase after him. Then, Yang Ziyuan would be in great danger. So he could only fight with all his might, and in the blink of an eye, he fought with the Magma Dragon until the sky turned dark. Chapter 1068. 1 man and 1 dragon, 1 water and 1 fire. Their attributes just so happened to counter each other. Although the Magma Dragon was powerful, its attributes were restrained by Yi Feng's attributes. Therefore, it was unable to tear apart this merman who dared to challenge its majesty. But Yi Feng was an Earth rank level 7 after all, and there was a great disparity between his strength and the Magma Dragon's. Every time the Magma Dragon spat out a huge tongue of fire at him, although he desperately used a water column to extinguish it, he was still shaken to the point that the blood in his chest kept churning, and he almost vomited. He gritted his teeth and fought. He had no way out now, he could only fight. He couldn't let the Magma Dragon hurt Yang Ziyuan, so when he retreated in the other direction, deeper and deeper into the Magma River, and the Magma River was still being swallowed by the swamp. Fiery red magma emerged from the swamp, swallowing and spitting out flames. Yifeng's figure flew as if he was flying, and spun around the crystals that were about to fall. Several times, he almost stepped on empty air and was swallowed by the fiery red swamp. Yang Ziyuan was scared out of her wits. She saw Yifeng getting closer and closer to the magma river, so nervous that her heart almost jumped out. Yifeng, come here. Don't retreat anymore. She saw Yifeng almost stepping on the churning magma and was scared out of her wits. Finally, she couldn't help but scream. Now, in this whole place, only the tunnel Yang Ziyuan was in was relatively safe. Her scream didn't call Yifeng, but it made the magma dragon look in her direction, and then, a big fireball flew towards her face. Ziyuan, be careful. Yifeng yelled as he flew over without a care for anything else. He actually arrived before the fireball and blocked in front of Yang Ziyuan. Originally, when he fought with the dragon, he used guerrilla tactics and didn't confront the dragon directly. Firstly, he wanted to avoid its edge, and secondly, he wanted to feel out the dragon's style. But at this moment, in order to protect Yang Ziyuan behind him, he could no longer dodge and could only face the attack head-on. He waved his hand and set up 2 water walls in front of him to block the fireball. Boom! 2 deafening explosions rang out. The fireball hit the water wall, making an earth-shattering sound. In any case, the fireball was extinguished, and the 2 water walls that Yifeng set up were also broken. Yifeng was also shaken to the point that his face turned pale. A mouthful of blood surged up his throat, but he forcefully swallowed it back down. Ziyuan, step back. He shouted. Yang Ziyuan also knew that she couldn't help at this time. She gritted her teeth and took a few steps back, but her eyes were fixed on Yifeng. She couldn't help but say, "You, be careful." Understood. Yifeng's reply was very light, but his heart was slightly warm. Woo lololo, woo ka ka ka. The magma dragon suddenly made a series of long and short sounds. Yang Ziyuan didn't understand the beast language, and only felt that the sound was a little harsh, but she didn't feel anything else. But Yifeng's face changed. He understood the beast language, and he already heard the ruthless words that the magma dragon said, "Don't even think about running away. This divine beast will completely turn your bones into ashes and scatter your souls, so that you won't be able to reincarnate." Yifeng knew that the magma dragon in front of him had this ability. If he was defeated, the 2 of them would fall into the hands of the magma dragon, and their souls would be scattered. It didn't matter if Yifeng died, Sharkmen didn't have a chance to reincarnate, but Yang Ziyuan did. He definitely couldn't let Yang Ziyuan fall into that state. So he could only win, and not fail. Chapter 1069. He took a deep breath, and pearl-like blood beads suddenly appeared on his 10 fingers. They moved rapidly in the air as he chanted. In the blink of an eye, a blood talisman was formed in the air. The blood talisman was beautiful, but it had an ominous aura. The blood talisman spun in the air and went directly into Yifeng's body. Yifeng's face turned pale and then red. At this moment, it was as if he was injected with chicken blood. His power doubled in an instant. His pair of blue eyes were now glowing red. He once again engaged in a fierce battle with the lava dragon. Although Yang Ziyuan's kung fu was not high, she could still see the general pattern. She was surprised to find that Yifeng, who had already fallen into a disadvantageous position, seemed to have been injected with great vitality in an instant. His whole body was in high spirits, and the water column and ice blades he shot out were getting bigger and sharper, forcing the magma dragon to retreat step by step. The magma dragon was naturally unwilling to give up and fought back with all its might. A man and a dragon fought together, dazzling the onlookers. They were fighting so fiercely that the whole cave was shaking and rumbling. Countless crystals fell down and melted in the magma. The magma surged and overflowed, like a tongue of fire wantonly engulfing the entire cave. Yang Ziyuan could not help but take a few steps back, but she was shaken to the point where she could not stand. The whole scene was like the end of the world. The beautiful crystal cave had now become a purgatory on earth. It was a sea of fire, and the temperature in the air was rising sharply. In the blink of an eye, it had risen to an unbearable level. Yang Ziyuan could no longer calm down and watch the fight. She began to dodge the falling crystals. The high temperature made her vision hazy. The water in her body seemed to have evaporated, and she became weak. She tried her best to retreat, but the oxygen in the air seemed to be getting less and less. Her limbs were weak and her mind was in a daze. Finally, she collapsed to the ground. Her head was buzzing, and her vision turned black. The darkness was spreading rapidly. A huge crystal above her head began to shake because of the fight. It was on the verge of falling down. Before she fainted, she saw the lava dragon collapse and Yifeng arrive, bathed in blood. Yang Ziyuan slowly regained consciousness. She slowly opened her eyes. There was absolute darkness in front of him. He couldn't even see his own fingers. No matter how hard she blinked, it was useless. Could it be that she was blind? A huge wave of panic swept over her. She clawed around with both hands, trying to grab something to calm the panic in her heart. His entire body was burning, and the pain was intense. He must have been accidentally scratched by the falling crystal. His calf seemed to be fractured. Every time he moved, he felt a piercing pain. She tried to move, but found that her body seemed to be stuck somewhere, and she couldn't move at all. He was buried alive. What about Yifeng? What about Yifeng? She was so flustered that she couldn't help but call out, Yifeng. The moment she spoke, she felt that her voice was extremely hoarse and her throat was burning with pain. No one responded. Yifeng, where are you? Only her own voice was still echoing in the air. Yifeng, you're here, right? Don't scare me. Her voice even sounded like she was about to cry. The surroundings were dead silent. It was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. It was as if she was alone in a huge empty tomb. Chapter 1070. Her surroundings were deathly silent. It was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. It was as if she was alone in a huge and empty tomb. No matter how much she cried and screamed, no one answered. Could it be that Yifeng was dead? Yang Ziyuan could only move her hands in a small area. She frantically groped around. She was surrounded by large stones. Some were sharp, some were round, and some were squeezed around her. She was stuck in the gap between the stones and could not move at all. At this time, she finally understood that she was really buried underground. The shadow of death hung above her head. Yifeng, 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 where are you? The great fear made Yang Ziyuan's voice choke with sobs. It was somewhat shrill and mournful. Could it be that she was buried here by herself? Was Yifeng already dead? No, her hands frantically groped around. Yifeng, Yifeng, answer me. Don't ignore me. I'm scared. I'm telling you, I'm scared. Suddenly, there was the sound of stones crashing around her. A hand gently held her frantic and trembling hand. She was startled. Then, like a drowning person, she tried to hold on to a piece of driftwood. Yifeng? Is it you? That hand held her again. Although the strength was light, it was firm. A hoarse voice came, but it was calm as usual. Don't be scared. It's me. It was Yifeng. He was still alive. Yang Ziyuan's heart, which had been hanging in the air for a long time, finally calmed down a little. Tears flowed out of her eyes. She held his hand tightly, as if she had finally found someone to rely on. She felt wronged and frightened at the same time. Are we buried alive? How are you? Yifeng's wet palm gently patted her small hand. I'm fine. His hand was cold and wet. Yang Ziyuan became nervous again. She wanted to touch his hand. Why is your hand so wet? Is it blood? Is it blood? Are you injured? Is it serious? Is it serious? She and Yifeng were separated by a few rocks. Yifeng's hand was forcibly squeezed through the cracks. She couldn't see Yifeng's expression clearly and couldn't check his injuries. Her heart was in her throat again. Yifeng slowly withdrew his hand and said indifferently, "No, this is magma dragon's blood." Yifeng's voice was still calm, and his breathing was also very stable. It didn't seem like he was injured. Yang Ziyuan finally breathed a sigh of relief. She placed her hand back into Yifeng's. "Yifeng, can you hold my hand? I'm scared." Her voice was weak and tentative. It sounded like she would break down if Yifeng rejected her. However, deep in her heart, She firmly believed that Yi Feng would not reject her. Yi Feng had never rejected any of her requests. Even if it was an unreasonable request, Yi Feng would do it for her without saying a word. Yi Feng gently held her hand, making Yang Ziyuan feel a lot more at ease. However, her body was still trembling slightly. Yi Feng held her hand a little harder and said in a coaxing voice, "Ziyuan, don't be afraid. I'm here. Don't be afraid, I'm here." When the monster opened its mouth, he hugged her and gently covered her eyes. He said softly, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." The wind and snow were merciless. When the sled was about to collapse, he patted her and used his body to warm her. He comforted her, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Now, they were buried under rocks nearly 10,000 meters deep in the ice field. No one knew that when she was struggling in pain, it was his calm voice that gave her the courage to live. Chapter 1071. This sentence seemed to have a magical power. Every time Yi Feng said it, Yang Ziyuan would feel inexplicably at ease. Every time she was in danger and scared, it was Yi Feng who saved her time and time again, comforting her time and time again. "Yi Feng, why are you always so good to me? But I already have Xian. I will end up with Xian in the end. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? How am I going to repay your love? Yi Feng, I wish I could split myself in two." Yang Ziyuan's tears flowed out of her eyes like pearls from a broken necklace. They fell one by one, wetting her cheeks and falling onto the rocks beside her, slowly disappearing. One of the tears seemed to fall onto Yi Feng's hand. He immediately pulled it back as if he had been scalded. Yang Ziyuan was shocked. She fumbled around and grabbed his hand. Her voice sounded like she had been greatly wronged. "Yi Feng." Yi Feng's hand fumbled around to wipe away Yang Ziyuan's tears. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wipe them all away. He sighed and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Ziyuan, don't cry. I'm fine. I won't let anything happen to you." He suddenly coughed. Although he tried his best to suppress it, he couldn't stop for a while. Yang Ziyuan opened her eyes wide. She wanted to see Yi Feng's condition clearly, but it was still pitch black. Yi Feng, what's wrong with you? You are seriously injured, aren't you? Does it hurt? Why can't you stop coughing?" Her tears seemed like they were about to gush out again. Yi Feng had already stopped coughing. His voice sounded weak, but this weakness disappeared in an instant. He said lightly, "I'm fine. It's just a flesh wound. I accidentally breathed in the dust that floated down just now, so I coughed a few times." "Dust? Maybe so." Yang Ziyuan's chaotic mind calmed down a little. She held Yi Feng's hand tightly, as if she wanted to draw courage from it. She held his hand, not daring to let go. She could feel that Yi Feng was really by her side. In this dark underground, she was not alone. Yi Feng was with her. She felt that her chest was a little stuffy, and the huge rock that was pressing down on her made it hard for her to breathe. She really wanted to push the big rock away, but she didn't have the strength. "Yi Feng, will we die here?" "No, Ziyuan, you have to hold on. You can do it." Yi Feng's voice sounded a little rushed. But, this is several thousand feet underground. You are also trapped. We are buried here. How can we get out?" Yang Ziyuan's voice was filled with helplessness. "Master Han and Miss Ning will come. Ziyuan, don't be discouraged. This space was very small, and it was sealed by rocks." After a while, the oxygen began to run out. Yang Ziyuan gradually felt cold. The stuffy feeling in her chest became more and more intense. Her head also felt a little dizzy, as if she would fall asleep in the next second. She muttered softly, "Yi Feng. I'm so sleepy." Yi Feng suddenly tightened his grip on her hand. "Ziyuan, you can't sleep." Yang Ziyuan woke up for a moment. "I don't want to sleep either, but I'm really sleepy. Can I sleep for a while?" Yi Feng patted her hand. His usually calm voice finally had a trace of panic. He finally became talkative. "Ziyuan, you can't sleep. If you sleep, you won't be able to wake up. Think about your family. They are waiting for you at home. Your husband is still outside the cave." Chapter 1072. Yi Feng seemed to be in pain when he said the last sentence, but it was replaced by anxiety in an instant. Ziyuan, wake up. Yes, Xian was still waiting for her. Yang Ziyuan forced herself to be awake and repeated over and over again, Father is still waiting for me. Xian is still waiting for me. I can't sleep, I can't sleep. Her voice gradually became softer. She suddenly felt a sharp pain in her finger, which made her sober for a moment. She seemed to have suddenly remembered something. That magma dragon? Dead. Yi Feng answered succinctly. Yang Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief. Then what about the ice flame flower? It's with me. Yang Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief again, but she was still worried about another thing. If we pluck it in advance, will it lose its effect? Ning Xuemo once said that after plucking the flower, it must be consumed within 2 hours for it to be effective. No. I have a way to keep it fresh. Yi Feng was silent for a moment and answered. Yang Ziyuan seemed to have sensed something. Guilt welled up in her heart, and she didn't say anything. Her dizziness became worse, and her eyes wanted to close again. Ziyuan, you can't sleep. Yi Feng held her hand tightly again. Yang Ziyuan forced herself to be awake. Yes, I won't sleep. I won't sleep. Her voice gradually became softer, suddenly became louder, and then gradually became softer again. Again and again, it could be seen that Yang Ziyuan was fighting against sleepiness. However, her voice became softer and softer, and finally, it was close to a murmur. The lack of oxygen for a long time made her a little confused. The reason why she was still holding on was that there was a trace of faith in her heart supporting her. Yi Feng kept shaking her hand. Ziyuan, wake up. Hold on a little longer. Xuemo and the others will arrive soon and save you. Yang Ziyuan's consciousness was almost blurred. She only heard half of Yi Feng's words. Suddenly, she trembled and became clear-headed for a moment. We have to go out together. Yi Feng paused for a moment, then softly replied, okay. Yang Ziyuan seemed to have become delirious. She just subconsciously repeated, go out together. Go out together. Yi Feng, we have to go out together. Yi Feng grabbed her hand and suddenly exerted force. Pain swept through her body in a flash. Yang Ziyuan suddenly woke up. Yi Feng, what are you doing? Ziyuan, let me sing a song for you. Don't sleep anymore, okay? Yi Feng wanted to sing. She had never heard sharkmen sing before. It must be beautiful, right? Yang Ziyuan shook her head and tried to wake herself up. Okay, I won't sleep. Woo woo, the sea breeze blows. Hualala, the waves roll. I pull the sea breeze to play on the swing. Yi Feng's voice had the tranquility and beauty of the deep sea. It seemed to resonate with the surrounding stone walls. His voice echoed in this small space, with a sense of emptiness and loneliness. Yang Ziyuan only felt her heart ache. Countless images flashed through her mind. The background was dark blue. She seemed to see an indescribably beautiful mermaid singing in the deep sea, which strangely overlapped with Yi Feng's voice and echoed. Just as she was about to touch it, these images scattered like shooting stars, and she could no longer find any trace of it. Yang Ziyuan couldn't help but hum along. Woo woo, the sea breeze blows. Hualala, the waves roll. I pull the sea breeze to play on the swing. After an unknown period of time, there was suddenly a small sound above her head. Chapter 1073. After an unknown amount of time, there was a sudden strange sound from above. Yang Ziyuan was already in a semi-conscious state. Her hand was held again, but this time, the strength was much lighter. Ziyuan, wake up. Xuemo and the others are here. Xuemo and the others are here. Yang Ziyuan shook her head and opened her eyes, but they were still pitch black. There was nothing out of the ordinary. She said in a daze, Yi Feng, you must be hallucinating. Suddenly, there was another muffled sound from above. It sounded like someone was moving rocks. This time, Yang Ziyuan heard it too. She forced herself to stay awake and shook Yi Feng's hand excitedly. Yi Feng, they're here. They're here to save us. Then, she shouted, Xuemo, we're here. She tried her best, but her voice was still as soft as a mosquito's. The muffled sound from above suddenly stopped. Yang Ziyuan seemed to hear a clear voice. Oh my god, Guru, they're really buried underground. Quickly move these rocks away. Let's save them quickly. There seemed to be fewer and fewer rocks above, and there was more and more oxygen. Because of the large amount of oxygen entering her lungs, she felt a slight swelling pain. Her dizzy mind gradually cleared up. Finally, a ray of light shone in, dispelling the lonely darkness. Then, the light became brighter and brighter. Yang Ziyuan closed her eyes in discomfort. When she opened them again, she saw Ning Xuemo's bright eyes. Ziyuan, are you okay? Yang Ziyuan looked at Ning Xuemo's delicate face and suddenly felt like a lifetime had passed. Was she saved? She didn't know how long she had been buried underground. It had been so long that she thought she was going to die, but she was suddenly saved. She felt like she was in a trance. The next second, she was ecstatic at being saved. At this moment, she almost wanted to cry. She suddenly turned her head. Her delicate face was full of surprise. Yifeng, we. Yang Ziyuan's voice stopped abruptly. She finally saw Yifeng's hand clearly. She could only see one of his arms. That arm was badly mangled and stuck between the cracks of the stone. Only one hand was still intact, but it was also pale and motionless. Yang Ziyuan screamed and then desperately tried to dig at the rocks around the arm. Yifeng. Yifeng, answer me. There was no reply. Yifeng, we're saved. Can you answer me? Yang Ziyuan's heart almost jumped out of her chest. She screamed as she tried to dig out the stones. I'll get you out. The lower half of her body was still stuck in the crack of the stone. This sudden turn of the body caused her unbearable pain, but she was completely unaware of it. Only a huge panic filled her heart. It can't be. Yifeng must have fainted. They were saved. When Ning Xuemo saw the color of Yifeng's fingers, her heart sank to the bottom. She quickly moved away a few more crystals. Then she jumped down and landed beside Yang Ziyuan. She then felt the pulse of that hand. There was no pulse. Yifeng, Ning Xuemo's face was pale. She quickly dug out the stones that had almost buried Yifeng. The wounds on Yang Ziyuan's hands split open and soon dyed the rocks red. She seemed to not feel it. Her body trembled violently and her face was pale. Yifeng. Yifeng. Answer me. No one answered. Yang Ziyuan's voice was trembling. Yifeng, don't scare me. Chapter 1074. Shenjiuli suddenly appeared beside Ning Xuemo and pulled her up. With a wave of his hand, a gust of wind blew past. The rocks in front of Yang Ziyuan suddenly trembled and cracks spread all over the rocks. With a gentle blow of the wind, the rocks silently shattered into thousands of pieces and fell down like rain. Yifeng's figure was finally fully revealed in the fragmented stone foam curtain. He lay quietly in a large pool of blood. His clothes were tattered and his body was covered with hideous wounds. There was not a single piece of undamaged skin. His blood seemed to have long dried up, leaving behind streaks of dried blood. His eyes were tightly shut and his face was as pale as snow. He did not move at all. Yang Ziyuan was petrified. After a while, she slowly walked over step by step and pushed Yifeng's body. Her voice trembled as she said, "Wake up, we are saved." Yifeng still did not move. Yang Ziyuan was naturally unwilling to give up and pushed him again. "Yifeng, don't scare me. Wake up, wake up." No matter how she pushed, Yifeng did not move. He lay there quietly with his eyes closed and his long eyelashes drooping. It was as if he had fallen asleep. Yang Ziyuan's hands and feet were inexplicably trembling. They were extremely cold. Her heart felt as if it was suspended above an ice abyss and would fall at any moment. She suddenly turned her pleading gaze to Ning Xuemo. "Xuemo, he fainted, right? He was just talking to me and singing for me. He must be too tired and has fainted, right? Can you wake him up? Once he wakes up, we can go out." Ning Xuemo's face became even paler. She did not give up and checked Yifeng's pulse, then his neck. She lifted his eyelids and looked at his pupils. Her fingers were also trembling. Yifeng did not have a heartbeat, no pulse, and his pupils were dilated. All the signs pointed to one thing. Yifeng was already dead. She was still too late. She had rushed here with all her might, but it was still too late. She suddenly turned around and grabbed Shinjoli's hand tightly. Guru, you have a way, right? Her gaze was like fire, carrying a final glimmer of hope. Shinjoli's heart sank. He held her waist tightly and shook his head slightly. If it was an ordinary person, even if they died, he could go to the underworld to capture their soul and revive them. However, Yifeng was Sharkmen, and Sharkmen only lived for one lifetime. Their souls did not return to hell. Once Sharkmen died, their souls would automatically disperse and transform into the sea breeze. Even the Almighty couldn't do anything about it. She could only watch helplessly as another friend of hers left her. Although she had experienced many life and death situations, at this moment, her heart was in great pain. Yifeng had actually died just like that. He was afraid that he would die with regret in his heart. He didn't even see what Yang Ziyuan looked like when she broke the twin curse. How could this be? Jiyu Xian, the main culprit, was still alive and kicking, while Yifeng, such a good Yifeng, had died an unnatural death here. Ning Xuemore felt a fiery rage burning in her heart. She clenched her fists tightly and didn't say a word. Yang Ziyuan looked from one to the other. The more she looked, the more frightened and flustered she became. Xuemore, he can't wake up now? You're a divine doctor. You must have a way, right? Divine doctors can't save the dead. Ning Xuemore blurted out with an inexplicable anger. Yifeng is already dead. Chapter 1075. Yang Ziyuan suddenly opened her eyes wide and her body swayed. She shook her head desperately and said in a shrill voice, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. He can't be dead. He must have just fainted. He was just talking to me, telling me not to be afraid and saying that he wanted to go out with me. She reached out her hand and covered some of the wounds on Yifeng's body that were still bleeding. Her other hand searched Yifeng's body for something. Ointment. So many wounds, Yifeng must be in a lot of pain. I need to apply ointment quickly. Ning Xuemore. She didn't know what to say for a moment. Yang Ziyuan found a small red bottle on Yifeng's body. Her eyes lit up and she hurriedly opened it, only to find that the medicine in the small bottle had already been used up. Her tears finally fell. Xuemore, what should we do? We've used up all the medicine. What should we do? What should we do? She was like a lost child who had been abandoned. Her whole body was trembling and tears stained her eyelashes. She suddenly grabbed Ning Xuemore's hand again. Xuemore, you must have more medicine, right? Can you give me another bottle? His wounds are still bleeding. He must have fainted after losing so much blood. It'll be fine if we stop the bleeding. Your medicine is very good at stopping bleeding. Give me another bottle, give me another bottle. She anxiously pulled Ning Xuemore's hand and knelt down. I want to apply medicine for him. Seeing Yang Ziyuan like this, Ning Xuemore's fingers clenched tightly. Although she tried to sound calm, there was a slight tremor in her voice. Ziyuan, it's useless. Yifeng is already dead. No matter how good the medicine was, it wouldn't have the effect of bringing the dead back to life. Yang Ziyuan stared blankly at Ning Xuemore, as if she didn't understand her words or refused to understand. She was stunned for a moment and shook her head violently. No. Of course not. How could Yifeng die? He's so powerful that even Magma Dragon was defeated by him. Shinjoli suddenly said, Magma Dragon is at Earth rank level 9, and Yifeng is only at level 7. He used the weapon dismemberment technique. His cold voice resounded in the narrow space, but it was exceptionally clear. It also awakens Yang Ziyuan's somewhat confused mind like the morning bell and evening drum. Dismemberment by force. Yang Ziyuan raised her head with tears in her eyes and asked subconsciously, What do you mean? Ning Xuemore's heart skipped a beat. Her gaze fell on Yifeng. Yifeng's blood had almost dried up, and his fingers were stiff. Sure enough, it was the symptom of dismemberment. She was a smart person. Previously, when she and the Almighty entered the collapsed cave, they found the corpse of a magma dragon. Naturally, she knew how powerful this magma dragon was. She thought that Yifeng and Yang Ziyuan were killed by this magma dragon. She almost cut open the magma dragon's stomach. Later, when she calmed down and checked the magma dragon's injuries, she saw that its body was full of wounds. It was obviously killed by someone. At that time, Ning Xuemore was still wondering how Yi Feng's kung fu had improved so much. So that was why. It turned out that he used the weapon dismemberment technique. Yi Feng wanted to see Yang Ziyuan break the twin life curse. He had been enduring all kinds of injustice just to see Yang Ziyuan return to normal. These few days, he must have been dreaming of finding the ice flame flower and seeing her eat it. If it wasn't a critical moment, he wouldn't have chosen this path. How desperate was he when he used the weapon dismemberment technique? How helpless was he? Ning Xuemore's heart was blocked by a hard knot. Chapter 1076. Ning Xuemore's gaze fell on Yang Ziyuan. She couldn't help but share some knowledge with her. Execution can double a person's psychokinesis for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. But once the time limit is over, the person will completely disappear from this world. That is to say, Yi Feng's soul has already dissipated half an hour ago. After saying the last sentence, she finally couldn't continue. Yang Ziyuan was stunned. The scene of Yi Feng fighting with Magma Dragon flashed through her mind. Her body trembled slightly. Yi Feng. Yi Feng. How could it be? How could it be? No, it can't be. It can't be like this, she suddenly screamed. No. No. You must have seen wrongly. How could his soul dissipate? He was clearly talking to me and even singing for me. Just now when you guys came, he even reminded me that I was saved. How could it be half an hour ago? You must be lying to me. I don't believe it. Ning Xuemore. Her heart became even heavier and more stifled. Yi Feng should have died the moment Magma Dragon died. But his soul had been holding on. He kept talking to Yang Ziyuan until the rescue team arrived. Finally, he couldn't hold on anymore. Just how strong was his obsession? Ziyuan, how lucky you are to have Yi Feng's love. How unlucky you are to have mistaken a fisheye for a pearl. For Jiyu Xian, you hurt Yi Feng who loved you for 2 lifetimes. Although there wasn't much logic in love, and although Ning Xuemore knew that Yang Ziyuan was affected by the twin life curse, she still felt bad for Yi Feng. Ning Xuemore couldn't help but sneer, because he was worried about you. He was afraid that you would be lonely and afraid that you would be scared. Yang Ziyuan's face turned pale. She felt like there was a row of steel needles piercing her heart. Her heart tightened into a ball and seemed to be convulsing in pain. For the first time in her life, her heart hurt so much. When she heard that Jiyu Xian's life was in danger at the wedding, she didn't feel so much pain. Yang Ziyuan sat there paralyzed. Her pretty face was full of pain and confusion. How could it be? Her gaze fell on Yi Feng. The 3 flowers of ice flames were blooming beautifully in the pool of Sharkman's blood. They were nourished by the blood. Not only did they not wither, but they also became more crystal clear. Finally, Yang's eyes to the world. And she looked at it. Her hand was trembling, she almost couldn't hold it, and her fingertips, she was pale. Her heart hurt. Her heart was so painful. It was so painful it was like it was being cut inch by inch. If Yi Feng's to look was Xiao. If Xiao Yi Feng's to snatch the flowers when the swamp appeared, he wouldn't have died. The flowers were the main culprit. She wanted to destroy them. She wanted to crush the flowers of ice flames with her fingers. Ning Xuemore was quick. She tapped on Yang Ziyuan's wrist. Yang Ziyuan's wrist went numb. Her reaction was slow, so Ning Xuemore easily snatched the flowers from her hand. The flowers can't be destroyed. Ning Xuemore spat out a few words. The flowers were exchanged with Yi Feng's life. They hadn't been used yet. Yang Ziyuan sat on the ground. She finally reacted and murmured, "Yes, the flowers can't be destroyed. Xian still needs them to save his life. Now that I have the flowers, I should be happy. I should be happy." She seemed to be trying to hypnotize herself. I should be happy. Chapter 1077. Yang Ziyuan staggered to her feet and tidied up her messy hair. I should be happy. She staggered again and squatted down. But why does my heart hurt so much? I didn't feel this much pain when Xian was dying. Why? Xian? Yes, he was the real culprit. There seemed to be a fire burning in Ning Shuamore's heart. With a bang sound, it sprang up. She used the sensing technique to contact Kirin. Kirin's anxious voice immediately came through. Master, how is it? Is Yang Ziyuan still alive? Ning Shuamore said coldly, Little Apple, kick that scumbag down. Kirin had long disliked that scumbag, so she agreed very quickly. Yes, master. Jiyu Xian was waiting anxiously on top. Suddenly, he saw Kirin striding over with an unfriendly aura. He immediately took a step back. What's wrong? You contacted. Before he could finish his words, the little Chelene had already kicked him down the ice crack. Go down and take a look yourself. Jiyu Xian screamed as he rolled down the cliff. After he landed, his face was pale. He was so scared and in pain that he couldn't stand up. When he came back to his senses, he saw Ning Shuamore standing beside him with a cold face. She was holding 3 beautiful flowers in her hand. You found the flower of ice flame? He was about to reach out to take it when he suddenly felt his arm go numb. Then, he froze there, unable to move. He opened his eyes wide in fear. He wanted to shout for help, but he found that he couldn't make a sound. Ning Shuamore ignored him. She waved her hand and formed a wooden blade. She directly cut Jiyu Xian's arm. Blood instantly gushed out and dripped onto the flower of ice flame. Ning Shuamore patiently waited for each petal to drink the blood before she turned and left. Speaking of which, it was strange. The petals were clearly stained with blood, but after a short while, the blood had seeped through and disappeared. The petals still looked fresh and clean. Ning Shuamore handed the flower of ice flame to Yang Ziyuan and said calmly, Ziyuan, eat this flower. Yang Ziyuan was stunned. She muttered, Why are you giving it to me? Isn't Xian sick? Ning Shuamore looked at her. The one who's sick is not him, it's you. Jiyu Xian put the twin curse on you. Only this flower can cure it. Yang Ziyuan looked even more confused. Twin curse? That's right. You'll understand everything after you eat this flower of yours. When the time comes, what you choose to do will be up to you. Ning Shuamore said. Yi Feng once wanted a result. He couldn't see it now, but the flower that he risked his life to get should still work. It could be considered as a comfort to Yi Feng. Yang Ziyuan took a step back. Her gaze fell on the flower, and then she slowly turned to look at Jiyu Xian. Jiyu Xian's face changed when he heard Ning Shuamore's words. He was as pale as death. He was fooled. It turned out that they came to understand Yang Ziyuan's twin curse. He wanted to tell Yang Ziyuan not to eat it, but Ning Shuamore sealed his acupoints. He couldn't say a word. He could only watch as Yang Ziyuan slowly reached out and took the 3 flowers. Then she slowly lowered her head and ate the flower of ice flame. It's over. Jiyu Xian couldn't stand anymore. He sat on the ground with a plop. Ning Shuamore felt a moment of regret when she handed the flower to Yang Ziyuan. Once Yang Ziyuan broke the twin curse, recovered her memories, and saw Yi Feng die for her, what would she do? Chapter 1078. When Ning Shuamore handed the flower to Yang Ziyuan, she had a moment of regret. Once Yang Ziyuan broke the twin life curse and recovered her memories, what would she do if she saw that Yi Feng had died for her? But she immediately made up her mind and handed the flower to Yang Ziyuan. She definitely couldn't let Yi Feng die in vain. She couldn't let Yang Ziyuan marry that scumbag. Seeing Yang Ziyuan slowly swallow the ice flame flower, she suddenly felt a sense of nervousness. Time passed second by second, but Yang Ziyuan was still sitting there calmly. Her face was getting paler, and even her lips were drained of blood. She looked down at Yi Feng who was lying next to her and her body began to tremble. Her hand trembled as she touched Yi Feng's face. It was cold to the touch, as if her heart had sunk to the bottom of the sea. The coldness seemed to have scalded her fingertips, and she quickly moved away. Then she gently touched his eyebrows, his slightly closed eyes, and his high nose. Her voice trembled strangely, as if she was crying and laughing at the same time. You're really dead. You're really dead, dead. Her fingers trembled violently, but she stubbornly tried to feel his breath. Her face was getting paler and paler, and her eyes were getting bigger and bigger. She suddenly picked him up and hugged him tightly in her arms. She shook Yifeng's body vigorously and gripped his arm tightly. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. How can you die? Wake up for me. If you die, I'll immediately marry someone else. I'll be with someone else for the rest of my life. I'll never look at you again. I'll never look at you again. I'll never remember you again. Yifeng, do you hear me? Wake up. Wake up. I won't allow you to sleep again. I won't allow it. Do you hear me?" Of course, Yifeng didn't wake up and didn't move. No matter how much she threatened or cried, he would never wake up again. After he finished speaking, he abandoned Yifeng and walked towards Ning Xuemo. "Xuemo, let's go. Let him continue pretending to be asleep. I don't want to talk to him anymore." Ning Xuemo was pulled a few steps forward by her. Just as she was about to say something, she saw Yang Ziyuan's eyes were empty, her face was pale, and her footsteps were getting slower and slower. Finally, Yang Ziyuan staggered and stopped. She slowly turned around and her gaze fell on Yifeng. Ning Xuemo's eyes fell on Yang Ziyuan's calf. "Ziyuan, your leg is injured." Yang Ziyuan stared blankly at Ning Xuemo, then looked down at her calf. Her calf was mottled with blood, and she hadn't had time to bandage it. She suddenly staggered back and sat beside Yifeng. "Yifeng, my leg is injured. It hurts. It really hurts. Get up and bandage it for me." She looked at him attentively, waiting for him to be like how he was in the past. Every time she was injured, he would be so heartbroken. He would count her carelessness and bandage her carefully. In the past, every time he was angry with her and ignored her, she would suffer a small injury and then run to his side to show him her grievance. He would sigh and bandage it for her. Now that her leg was injured to this extent, and the blood almost dyed her pants red, he wouldn't look at her or comfort her anymore. There was no one else in this world who cared about her as much as he did. He would never open his eyes to look at her again. Yang Ziyuan waited for a long time, but he didn't respond. She didn't give up and held his hand, pulling his hand to her leg. "Brother Yifeng, I'm really injured. Feel it." Chapter 1079. It was this pair of hands that had hugged her in the most dangerous time. One of his hands had covered her eyes, telling her not to be afraid. Now, his hands were passively placed on her thighs, and he would not bend his hands to protect her anymore. She was overwhelmed by a huge pain. She suddenly hugged him again, as if she had a blood feud with him. She hugged him so hard that her fingertips turned white. "I know, you must be taking revenge on me, right? You hate me for leaving with another man, so you used your death to take revenge on me, right?" Yang Ziyuan was extremely abnormal at this moment. Her cheeks were red, and her body was shivering because of the cold. She bit her red lips so hard that they were bleeding, but her eyes were shockingly bright. "You were wrong first. You didn't tell me that you were not my biological brother. You made me feel abnormal. I tried my best to shift my feelings away from you, so I let myself fall in love with that man. I tried my best to hypnotize myself to fall in love with that man." Ning Xuemo was stunned. She seemed to be talking about the matter between Yifeng and Yi Yu. Yang Ziyuan continued as if she was crazy. "I went ashore with him, but I missed you so much that I was scared. I didn't marry that man because I couldn't let you go. I tried my best to escape back to the sea. I wanted to return to your side, even if I had to be your sister forever. I accidentally found out the truth that you were not my brother. I was so happy, angry and happy at the same time. I swam in the sea like a madwoman." She choked for a moment. "I tried my best to come back. I swam for 3 days and 3 nights without sleep. But you got engaged with another woman. You wanted to marry another woman. You wanted to marry another woman in front of me. I was so angry. I said I wanted to be a human. I asked you to help me beg the sorcerer of the mermaid tribe. You know I'm afraid of pain the most. I thought you wouldn't bear to let me do the operation. But you agreed in the end. Yifeng, do you know how scared I was at that time? How desperate I was. I think you really don't want me anymore." Yang Ziyuan was like an abandoned child. Her voice began to tremble. During the operation, I was in so much pain. I screamed in pain. I wanted you to come in and see me. But you didn't come. Yifeng, you actually didn't come. I bled so much, I was in so much pain, I cried so much. But you still didn't come. At that time, I was really desperate. I wanted to die. Instead of watching you marry someone else, I'd rather die in that operation. Yifeng, it's all your fault. It's all your fault. I just want to take revenge on you. I want you to watch me marry someone else in this lifetime and become someone else's wife. I will ignore you for the rest of my life. This is your retribution. Retribution. Did you hear that? At that time, I swore that I would never fall in love with you again, that I would never be your sister again. Her voice was intermittent, with one sentence after another. The more Ning Xuemore listened, the more alarmed she became. Yang Ziyuan had really recovered Yi Yu's memories. How could this be? Didn't the twin life curse only remove the curse that Ji Yuxian put on her? Why did it have the ability to recover her previous memories? She looked at Shen Zhouli with a questioning gaze. Shen Zhouli also frowned slightly and transmitted his voice to her. Sharkman's blood has some unexpected miraculous effects. Perhaps her recovery of her previous memories has something to do with the flower absorbing Yifeng's blood. Chapter 1080. Ning Xuemore felt as if there was a stone in her heart. She couldn't help but take a step forward. Ziyuan, Yang Ziyuan didn't respond at all. She was completely immersed in the memories of the past. She smiled bitterly. Yifeng, I swore to cut off all ties with you at that time. Since you could watch me die, why? Why did you come to me again? It wasn't easy for me to forget you. She laughed out loud, but her laughter was full of sorrow. Yifeng, you're so cruel. You didn't let me go even when you died. I can't be more cruel than you. I can't be more cruel than you. How could you do this to me? She laughed until her face was full of tears, wetting Yifeng's clothes. Blood mixed with tears fell together, like a demonic flower blooming. She cried like a child who had been wronged. Brother Yifeng, Are you? She threw herself on Yifeng and cried until her whole body trembled. Brother Yifeng, wake up. Are you is back. Don't you want me anymore? Don't you want me again? At the end of her words, she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, sprinkling it on the front of Yifeng's clothes. Ning Xuemore was shocked. She couldn't let Yang Ziyuan go on like this. If she went on like this, she would go crazy. Ning Xuemore walked forward and pulled her up without any explanation. Ziyuan, don't cry. Don't cry. She forcibly held her in her arms and sent her psychokinesis to calm her almost boiling blood. Yang Ziyuan wanted to throw herself back on Yifeng, but she wasn't as strong as Ning Xuemore. She struggled a few times but couldn't break free from her grasp. Let go of me. Let go of me. I want him to wake up. I want him to talk to me. Yang Ziyuan struggled under Ning Xuemore's hands like crazy and shouted crazily. Her eyes were red and filled with madness. Ning Xuemore's heart sank. She steeled herself and raised her hand to slap her. Yang Ziyuan, wake up. Yifeng was dead. He was dead. Did you hear that? Even if you don't want to admit it, he's already dead. Wake up. This was a resounding slap. Yang Ziyuan shuddered as if she had been woken up from a nightmare. She stopped yelling and stared blankly at Ning Xuemore for a moment before slowly turning her head to look at Yifeng on the ground. It was as if she had been drenched in ice and snow from head to toe. She slowly squatted down and hugged her knees with her arms. Her long hair draped over her shoulders as she curled up and trembled slightly. She muttered, "Yes, he's dead. He doesn't want me anymore." Ning Xuemore looked around. The cave had just collapsed, and there were signs of it collapsing again. This place was not safe. She took a deep breath and pulled Yang Ziyuan again. Ziyuan, wake up. Let's bring Yifeng up, okay? That way, he can rest in peace. Rest in peace. These words agitated Yang Ziyuan again. Her body suddenly stiffened and she slowly raised her head. Her gaze fell on Yifeng again and she said softly, "We sharkmen go to the sea to rest in peace." Yifeng loved the sea deeply. If it wasn't for looking for her, he might not have come to the land for the rest of his life. As a result, he died in a foreign land. Ning Xuemore closed her eyes. Okay, I know a path that leads to the sea. Let's go. She was about to step forward and carry Yi Feng onto Kirin's back when Yang Ziyuan bent down before her. She struggled to carry Yi Feng and moved him out step by step. She was petite and it was already difficult for her to carry Yi Feng, let alone carry him. After a few steps, she fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 1081. She was petite and it was already difficult for her to carry Yi Feng, let alone carry him. After a few steps, she fell heavily to the ground. Ning Xuemore hurriedly helped Yang Ziyuan up. Her knee was already bruised and bleeding, but she didn't seem to feel it. She continued to carry Yi Feng and limped out. Ning Xuemore couldn't help but say, "Ziyuan, put Yi Feng on Little Apple." Yang Ziyuan didn't say anything. She just hugged Yi Feng even tighter, as if she was hugging the most important treasure in her life. It was as if she was afraid that someone would take it away from her. They continued to stumble forward. Ning Xuemore and Shinjiuli followed behind them. Kirin also followed with drooping ears. In the narrow cave, only Jiyu Xian was left, with his acupoints sealed. He had been left behind. No, he didn't want to be left here. He would die here. Jiyu Xian tried his best to attack the acupoints that Ning Xuemore had casually sealed. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or something else, but the acupoints were unsealed. He was overjoyed and immediately stumbled out. When he finally saw Ning Xuemore and the others, he didn't dare to shout. He just followed them from a distance. Shinjiuli seemed to have sensed something. He pursed his lips slightly. Without turning his head, he waved his hand. Jiyu Xian's eyes were wide open and he was completely frozen in place. He was terrified for a moment, but he couldn't shout anymore. He could only watch as the group walked further and further away. After some time, Ning Xuemore and the others finally walked out of the cave and saw the blue sky again. The exit of the cave was an ice cliff. Below the ice cliff was the surging sea. Yang Ziyuan was still holding Yi Feng. Her expression was blank as she walked forward. If Ning Xuemore hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen off the cliff. Yang Ziyuan finally regained her senses. Looking at the undulating waves of the sea below, she slowly revealed a smile and softly said, "Big brother Yi Feng, look, the sea." She hugged Yi Feng and slowly sat down facing the sea. "Brother Yi Feng, you actually want to return to the sea the most, right? Once our shark men leave the water, their bodies will feel very uncomfortable. You have always wanted to go back, right? You're just worried about me, right?" She lowered her eyes and smiled to herself. "Big brother Yi Feng, you did everything for me, but I didn't do anything for you. I only know how to be willful in front of you, but I didn't do anything for you. Big brother Yi Feng, what do you want me to do the most? Let me do it for you, okay?" Yi Feng naturally wouldn't answer her. She hugged Yi Feng tightly again. "Big brother Yi Feng, tell me. Tell me." Kirin couldn't help but say, "Yi Feng wanted you to eat the fish he roasted for you, but you didn't want to eat it. Now you can't eat it even if you want to." Yang Ziyuan's body stiffened. She lowered her head to look at Yi Feng in her arms. She seemed to recall the scene when they first arrived. Yi Feng really did want to roast fish for her, but she would rather eat that scum's fish than have a taste. Her lips trembled slightly as she pressed her face against Yi Feng's cold face. "Big brother Yi Feng, I'm sorry." Her tears dripped onto Yi Feng's face, but she couldn't call him back no matter what. Ning Xuemore's chest also felt very stuffy. She didn't say anything else. Yang Ziyuan's sadness was too strong. Letting her cry here was better than keeping it bottled up in her heart. After a while, Yang Ziyuan slowly raised her head and looked at Ning Xuemore. "Xuemore, can you ask Kirin to help me catch another ice crystal fish?" Chapter 1082. Ning Xuemore nodded and turned to order Kirin, "Little Apple, go down and catch an ice crystal fish." The little Chileen nodded its big head. "It's not a big deal. Leave it to me. Don't even mention one, even if it's a basket full of them, I can still catch them." It leaped up, and with a splash, it created a big splash of water. Yang Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and looked at the sea with eyes full of longing and reminiscence. There were white birds circling the sea in the distance. The starry sky was bright, the moon was cold, the sea breeze was whistling, and the waves were rolling. There seemed to be a faint song from afar, full of sadness. Ning Xuemo stood beside her and wanted to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. At this time, no matter what she said, Yang Ziyuan would not listen. She was completely immersed in her own world. Yifeng's death was a fatal blow to her. It was hard to imagine how she would live in the future. Even if she went back, she would no longer be the innocent Yang Ziyuan. She would be the mermaid Yi Yu who carried the memories of two lives. The little Cheline quickly popped its head out and flew up like a wisp of smoke. It shook violently, and after its scales were once again refreshed, it ran over as if it was asking for credit. Master, master, look, I caught 3 ice crystal fish. Ning Xuemo patted Little Apple's big head to encourage it. Little Apple enjoyed it and rubbed its head against her palm. Before it was satisfied, it heard Shinjoli say lightly, "Go down and catch your own food." Little Apple felt its body suddenly fly into the air and its whole beast flew out directly. It plunged into the sea like a cannonball. It pulled its head out of the mud for a long time. After it came out, it did not dare to fly up. It opened its mouth and angrily swallowed a big fish that passed by. Yang Ziyuan clumsily handled one of the ice crystal fish. She scraped the scales and removed the internal organs. She was busy for a long time before she finished all these work. In the past, he had seen Yifeng doing it with ease, but now that he was doing it himself, he realized how difficult it was. If he wasn't careful, he would be scraped by the scales. It turned out that big brother Yifeng had done so much for her. It was a pity that she didn't cherish him. Now that he had completely left, it was too late for regrets. Yang Ziyuan closed her eyes. Her tears had already dried up, but the deep sorrow in her heart was like a mass of thick ink that couldn't be dissolved, slowly spreading. The pain was so heavy that she couldn't breathe. In the end, she set up a fire and skewered the fish that was almost processed on a branch. Yang Ziyuan slowly put Yifeng down and let him sit up straight. She snuggled up behind him and hugged Yifeng. She placed the branch with the fish in it into Yifeng's hand. Yifeng's hand was clenched tightly. There seemed to be something in it. Yang Ziyuan silently pried his hands off one by one. It was a piece of the little mermaid crystal. She held her breath. The pain in her heart attacked her fiercely. She held the crystal so tightly that her whole body was trembling. Big brother Yifeng, the crystal that she casually picked up and gave to him, was treated like a treasure by him. He always carried it with him, even when he died, he held it in his hand. His body was full of holes, but this fragile crystal remained intact. It shone with a strange luster under the moonlight. When she was carving Jiyu Xian's crystal, Yifeng asked her to carve it for him. What did she say at that time? Yes, she asked him to wait. She even slapped him. She didn't expect that after waiting, they would be separated by life and death. Chapter 1083. Yang Ziyuan's heart ached so much that she wanted to dig it out directly. She curled up tightly beside Yifeng. Brother Yifeng. Brother Yifeng. Please forgive me, forgive you. You knows she was wrong. Her voice seemed to resonate with the sobbing of the sea at this moment. It was sad and sorrowful, making those who heard it sad and those who heard it cry. Yifeng's body was suddenly swayed by her and was about to fall to the ground. Yang Ziyuan was so scared that she rushed over and lay down before his body fell to the ground. Yifeng fiercely smashed onto her body. She only let out a muffled groan and gently brushed away the snow on Yifeng's body. She slowly helped him up with a head full of cold sweat. She asked softly, Brother Yifeng, did you fall anywhere? Does it hurt? It's all you's fault. You shouldn't have fooled around when Brother Yifeng was roasting fish. Brother Yifeng spoils you too much. You should teach you a lesson at this time. Ning Xuemo stood at the side and felt a dull pain in her heart. Yang Ziyuan's mind was obviously not normal again. There was a burnt smell in the air, as if something was being roasted. Ning Xuemo saw that the fish had been roasted. She was so distracted that she forgot about the fish for a moment. Yang Ziyuan was also stunned. She stared blankly at the ice crystal fish that was being roasted black in the fire. Suddenly, she rushed forward and reached out to grab the fish. Ning Xuemo quickly stopped her. Yang Ziyuan was still struggling desperately and kept reaching out to grab the fish. Looking at her, Ning Xuemo's heart suddenly burned with evil fire. She scolded her, "Yang Ziyuan, are you crazy? That's spiritual fire. If you put your hand in, your whole arm will be crippled, do you understand? Yi Feng risked his life to save you. How can you bear to ruin yourself like this?" Yang Ziyuan was stunned by her scolding. After a while, she slowly lowered her head. "But that's the fish that Brother Yi Feng roasted for me. I can't spoil his good intentions." Ning Xuemo was both distressed and angry. "Then you're going to ruin yourself like this? Can't you roast another one?" Yang Ziyuan suddenly shrank back like an injured hedgehog. Her whole body was trembling. "Xuemo, don't say any more. I beg you, don't say any more. This fish can't be wasted. Wu-woo, this is the first fish that Brother Yi Feng has roasted for me in this lifetime." Ning Xuemo closed her eyes and sighed. She extinguished the spiritual fire and waved her hand. The burnt fish flew into Yang Ziyuan's hand. Yang Ziyuan was stunned. Then she smiled happily and lowered her head to eat the fish. The fish was burnt black and gave off an unpleasant burnt smell. There wasn't any seasoning on it, but Yang Ziyuan ate it seriously as if she had found a treasure. As she ate, tears streamed down her face. Her usually sweet voice became slightly hoarse. She seemed to be holding back her surging emotions. She raised her eyes and smiled at Yi Feng. "It's delicious. It's delicious. Brother Yi Feng, are you really likes the fish you roasted?" Yi Feng still looked the same. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Yang Ziyuan held him in her arms and said softly, "Brother Yi Feng, are you as greedy? I want to eat another one. Brother Yi Feng, can you roast another fish for our Yu?" She started to prepare the second fish. While roasting, she held Yi Feng's hand and smiled sweetly. She was like a young girl in love, but her eyes were empty. Chapter 1084. She began to prepare the second fish. While roasting it, she held Yi Feng's hand and smiled sweetly, like a girl in love, but her eyes were empty like a doll that only knew how to smile. Yang Ziyuan once again lowered her head to eat the fish. In fact, she was already full after eating the first fish, but she still ate the second one with a numb expression. She praised while tears streamed down her face. After eating the fish, Yang Ziyuan began to carve the little mermaid crystal with a knife. Under the moonlight, Ning Xuemo watched the crystal gradually become clear. In the end, Yang Ziyuan wasn't good at carving, so she accidentally cut herself several times. In the end, when she finished carving the crystal, her hands were also full of scars. The crystal soaked in her blood looked exceptionally beautiful, sparkling and translucent, sparkling under the moonlight. Yang Ziyuan happily picked up the crystal and waved it in front of Yi Feng. "Brother Yi Feng, look, isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it look like you? Brother Yi Feng, as long as you say you want it, you will give it to you immediately." Her voice was lively and sweet, even with a hint of playfulness. Ning Xuemo felt like there was a big stone in her heart. It was so heavy that she had nowhere to put it. "Brother Yi Feng, I'm just joking with you. Even if you don't say anything, you will definitely give it to you. Everything that you has is yours." Yang Ziyuan's voice was still playful, but her expression was full of pain. "Brother Yi Feng, can you talk to you? Even if it's just a sentence." She slowly squatted down. Her heart hurt so much that she wanted to take it out. Yang Ziyuan closed her eyes and slowly waited for the hysterical pain to pass. A gust of wind blew, bringing with it the smell of the salty sea. She supported Yi Feng and slowly got up. Everywhere she looked was a sea of blue. There seemed to be a soft sound in the air. "Big brother Yi Feng, you love the sea the most, right? At this moment, you must also want to return to the sea." Yang Ziyuan's voice was filled with tenderness, as if she was a wife who was about to send her lover off. "You came here clean, So you must want to go home clean, right? You will help you. Yang Ziyuan scooped up a handful of snow and carefully cleaned the wounds on Yifeng's body. She cleaned very carefully and very slowly, not letting go of any wounds. After a while, her small hands were frozen red and gradually lost feeling. After an unknown amount of time, Yifeng's wound was finally cleaned by her. Yang Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and gradually closed her eyes. She stood on tiptoe and kissed Yifeng's cold lips. This kiss was full of longing, crossing the distance between life and death, crossing the boundary of the river of stars, quietly lingering in this place. At the end of the kiss, Yang Ziyuan's cheeks were slightly red. Her watery eyes seemed to be filled with a sky full of stars, astonishingly bright. She looked at Yifeng affectionately, her eyes full of tenderness, and her lips gradually curved into a smile. She smiled charmingly and innocently, as if an innocent girl who did not know the affairs of the world had finally waited for her true love. She was also like that day under the blue sea, in the dazzling crystal forest, in front of thousands of sharkmen, little Princess Yiyu's beautiful eyes that could turn all living things upside down. Ning Xuemore suddenly had a bad premonition. The strong uneasiness made her want to rush up and grab Yang Ziyuan, but it was already too late. Yang Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and jumped down. The only thing that could be heard in the wind was a sentence that was like a whisper. "Big brother Yifeng, let's go home." Chapter 1085. Ning Xuemore did not expect that this trip to the icefield would end up like this. When they arrived, there were 5 of them, but when they returned, only she and the Almighty were left. The sky was filled with red clouds, and her heart was as heavy as the clouds in the sky. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have interfered in this matter. This way, Ziyuan wouldn't have died, and Yifeng wouldn't have died. I actually wanted them to be well, but I didn't expect. Ning Xuemore had always been straightforward and confident, but now she felt helpless and uncertain. Could it be that, it's really because I'm a jinx? No matter who I meddle in, no one will have a good ending. Shenjioli raised his hand and held her in his arms. He said lightly, "This ending is the best for them." According to the original fate, Yang Ziyuan and Jiyu Xian would have been married for 10 years. Jiyu Xian would have taken in another concubine, doting on that concubine and completely ignoring her and Rong Yang. He demoted her to a concubine. She was depressed and died of a serious illness. When Yifeng heard about her death, he would have come to avenge her. He fell into Jiyu Xian's trap and was captured. He was given to Le Hin Thai as a treasure. Le Hin Thai skinned him to make clothes, and his soul was scattered. Ning Xuemore was speechless. She did not expect Yifeng and Rong Yang's fate to be so cruel. She sighed slightly. Although their fate was cruel, they still had 10 more years to live. At the very least, Ziyuan will have a good life for a while. Half a year after Yang Ziyuan's marriage, the twin curse was broken. She regretted it, but what was done, and there was nothing she could do. She was always cold to Jiyu Xian. Jiyu Xian was angry, and he only cared about Rong Yang. A year later, Lord Yang died suddenly. Jiyu Xian inherited the position of Lord of Daliang City and made Rong Yang his second wife. Yang Ziyuan was only Jiyu Xian's legal wife in name. Her food and clothing expenses were often deducted by Rong Yang. She was depressed all her life and didn't even get to see Yifeng before she died. The Almighty explained Yang Ziyuan's unaltered fate in more detail. Ning Xuemore, from the looks of it, this ending was still better. She pursed her lips. I thought I could change their fates and let them finally obtain happiness. These two people clearly loved each other, but due to a freak combination of factors, they ended up like this. Yifeng loved her so much, but until the moment of his death, he didn't know that Yang Ziyuan loved him. And Yang Ziyuan couldn't tell him anymore. Going against the heavens and changing one's fate doesn't mean that you can change it to the outcome you want. Instead, you can force one's fate into an unknown passageway. As for whether it will be sad or happy, it all depends on the actions of the two people whose fates have been changed. Back then, Yifeng gambled on his fate with Yang Ziyuan. They were not meant to be in this lifetime, but Yang Ziyuan broke the curse when she jumped into the sea with Yifeng in her arms. She and Yi Feng will be fated to be in this lifetime. If they know how to seize the opportunity, it's possible that this lifetime's fate will become eternal. You mean, they will come back to life? Ning Xuemo's eyes lit up slightly. Shunjiuli rubbed his chin on the top of her head and gave her an unfathomable answer. Heaven's secrets are not to be revealed. Ning Xuemo. The Almighty was keeping her in suspense again. At this moment, Kareen had already carried them on their return journey. They flew over the deep blue sea under the ice field again. Shunjiuli glanced down at the waves. When Yang Ziyuan jumped into the sea with Yi Feng in her arms, Ning Xuemo subconsciously wanted to jump as well. However, he pulled her back and kicked the stunned Kareen into the sea. Chapter 1086. After Kareen jumped down, it discovered that there was a huge whirlpool at the bottom of the sea that no one dared to approach. It watched as Yang Ziyuan and Yi Feng were sucked into the whirlpool. Kareen was inexperienced and did not recognize the huge whirlpool that appeared out of nowhere. However, Shunjiuli knew. Ultimate ruin. That was the source of the sea, ultimate ruin. The sinkhole was also the source of life for all marine creatures. If there were no accidents, the two of them would be reborn in ultimate ruin. After all, Yang Ziyuan was forced to reincarnate as a human by the sea race sorcerer's curse. When the curse was broken, she would regain her identity as the sea race's sharkmen, and Yi Feng would still be the sharkmen. If their obsession with each other was deep enough, their memories of this life would not disappear. Yi Feng would still be Yi Feng, and Yang Ziyuan would still be the Yang Ziyuan with Yi Yu's memories. However, Yi Feng's fate was changed by Shunjiuli. It was a true heavenly secret. If it was revealed, not only would he be punished by the heavens, the fate of the two of them would change again. Thus, he could not tell Ning Xuemo. In any case, Ning Xuemo only hoped for her good friends to be well. As long as they were happy, everything else was not important. The two of them naturally returned to Buddha Lotus Mountain, and Ning Xuemo met the other disciples of the Sun Moon sect. Ning Xuemo's rapid growth made everyone's jaws drop. They simply did not dare to believe it. Especially Helian Xiao, who circled around her 3 times and only had one word left in his mouth: miracle. Miracle. When Ning Xuemo had just entered the ancestors' tutelage, she was still an Earth rank level 2 rookie. In just a short period of 10 days, she had actually advanced to Earth rank level 5 and was about to enter level 6. Not long after Ning Xuemo returned to the Buddha Lotus Mountain, the day of Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing's wedding arrived. Le Hin Thai sent someone to deliver an invitation. When Ning Xuemo saw the invitation, she said indifferently, "I'm not going. Send my blessings to His Highness the Crown Prince and Crown Princess on my behalf. I wish that they can grow old in harmony and love each other until their hair turns white." Then he sent the envoy away. "Didn't you agree to attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding?" Shunjiuli asked as he sipped his tea. After returning to Mount Buddha Lotus, Shunjiuli gave her a few days off so that she could relax. Finally, she became more lively. He thought that she would definitely attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding, but he did not expect that she would choose not to attend. Ning Xuemo was depressed. She sat on a chair and swayed. Maybe if I don't go, their result will be better. It seemed like the tragedy of Yang Ziyuan and Yi Feng had traumatized her. Shunjiuli was speechless. He pulled her up. "Come with me." Ning Xuemo stumbled and fell into his arms. She rubbed her eyebrows and looked up. "Where are we going?" "Chang Kong country." Shunjiuli spat out these 3 words and took her away. "I'm still a heavenly master there. The crown prince's wedding still needs a heavenly master." Ning Xuemo was speechless. She had forgotten that the great master was Han Shanyu. She was still unwilling to go. She broke free from his hand. "Great master, you can go by yourself. I don't need to go." She turned around and was about to return to her side chamber. "I'm going to rest." She did not know why, but she was a little sleepy recently. It was probably because she was too tired from running around for the past few days. Shunjiuli scooped her up in his arms and leaped into the air. "I've told you before that you can't leave my sight at all times. So wherever I go, you can only follow." Chapter 1087. Ning Xuemore felt a bit of a headache. Ever since the great god accepted her as his disciple and said that he would train her day and night, she and the great god had never been separated. They were like conjoined twins. No matter where she went, she could see the great god's figure. This kind of protection was airtight, but it also made her feel a bit breathless. She helplessly supported her forehead in his arms. Great God, I really think that I should have some private time. We should maintain a bit of distance occasionally. At this moment, Shenjioli was already flying in the sky with her. He put her on the cloud 2 feet away from him and then slightly closed his eyes. Well, now there is a distance. You can do whatever you want to do. Ning Xuemore's lips twitch. Great God, you are strong. Seriously counting the time, Ning Xuemore had left Changkong country for less than half a year. When she stepped into Marquis Jingyuan's mansion again, she had an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Everything in Marquis Jingyuan's mansion was still the same. In the few months that she was not here, old Zhong took care of Marquis Jingyuan's mansion in an orderly manner. The servants in the mansion were performing their duties, and it was no different from before she left. When old Zhong saw her, he was so excited that his eyes were filled with tears. When the master and servant met, it was lively. Ning Xuemore was originally worried about them, but when she saw them like this, her heart finally relaxed. She suddenly remembered Tom the chastity testing beast, so she asked old Zhong about it. Old Zhong looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. After a long time, he said, he went out shopping. He should be back soon. Ning Xuemore was flabbergasted. The chastity testing beast, that kind of monster, went shopping? What if it scared the cats and dogs on the street? Just as she thought about it, a voice sounded from outside, Old Zhong, come back. I have something delicious to eat. I'm hungry, I'm starving to death. That voice was very strange. It sounded like a foreigner speaking Chinese. The tone was very stiff and awkward. Following the voice, a blonde youth walked in with big strides. High nose, deep eyes, blonde hair, and blue eyes. He was actually a standard Northern European handsome guy. Ning Xuemore's heart moved. This is... Could it be? The handsome Caucasian man suddenly saw Ning Xuemore sitting at the head of the table and was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he shouted and rushed over, Little Xuemore. He opened his arms and wanted to give Ning Xuemore a bear hug. However, before his arm could touch the corner of Ning Xuemore's clothes, he suddenly felt as if a gust of wind had hit him head-on. He staggered back several steps and sat on the ground with a plop. His butt hurt badly from the fall. Fortunately, he was a thick-skinned person. He jumped up from the ground and said, Which bastard? Just as he was about to curse, Which bastard plotted against me? He suddenly saw Shenjioli sitting at the head of the table. His gaze was as cold as electricity, so he swallowed back the words he was about to say. Ning Xuemore had already stood up. She circled around him and called out tentatively, Tom? The golden-haired boy was almost in tears. I am. Xuemore, you finally came back. You finally missed your big brother. The golden-haired boy was actually Tom, the chastity testing beast. Ning Xuemore almost couldn't believe it. Tom, did you repossess another body? Tom shook his head like a rattledrum. No, I cultivated into a human form. Ning Xuemore didn't expect that it could cultivate into a human form in just a few months. It seemed that this child was also a genius. She looked at Tom again. The boy looked to be 14 or 15 years old. His delicate face was still childish. Is this your face from your previous life? Ning Xuemore wasn't sure. Chapter 1088. Yes. Tom's face was full of pride as he struck a pose. How is it? Isn't brother handsome? This sentence was actually very smooth. Ning Xuemore snapped her fingers. Cool. She glanced at him again. Your Chinese is also not bad. Although he still spoke with a foreign devil's accent, he could at least communicate with people. Tom had been a chastity testing beast for thousands of years. His internal psychokinesis had already reached the stage of transformation, but he didn't know how to use it and couldn't communicate with people normally, so he had been sullen until now. Later, The books that Ning Xuemore gave him were simply gospel to him. He eagerly read and understood. After a few months of closed-door cultivation, he finally found the method to cultivate into a human form. Half a month ago, he finally cultivated into a human form, which almost scared everyone in the Marquis Jingyuan mansion. Although it was difficult for beasts to cultivate into a human form, they could change their appearance as they wished. Therefore, Tom's human form was his appearance from his previous life. After cultivating into a human form, he had always regarded the Marquis Jingyuan mansion as his home. The years of being locked in a cage were his nightmare. Therefore, once he cultivated into a human form, he went out to the streets almost every day to enjoy the joy of freedom. At that time, the only person who could communicate with him and help him cultivate into a human form was Ning Xuemore. He naturally missed her very much. Now that he suddenly saw her return, he was so excited that he didn't know what to do. Once he opened his mouth, it was simply like the power of the yellow river from the sky, unceasing. Even if other people wanted to interrupt, they couldn't. Tom spoke with great delight, and Ning Xuemore was also amused by him to smile frequently. Shenjiuli sat there drinking tea and didn't intend to interrupt the two people. After returning from the ice field, Ning Xuemore had been somewhat depressed. Now that she rarely showed a happy face, he naturally wouldn't disturb her. Ning Xuemore and Tom's conversation found that he was very business-minded. In the month that he recovered into a human form, he had already solved several economic crises for the Marquis Jingyuan mansion, and also drove away several of the Ning mansion's best relatives. While they were talking, a faint noise came from outside. After a while, someone came in to report that third Aunt Ning and second young lady Ning were outside the door asking to see Ning Xuemore, Marquis Ning. Ning Xuemore naturally knew who this so-called third Aunt Ning was. She was the one whose arm was bitten off by the chastity testing beast. He didn't know where this second young Miss Ning came from. Tom snorted. This second young lady Ning is the daughter of third Aunt Ning. Her psychokinesis has reached human rank level 4. She's the one who's spoiled by the whole family. Ning Xuemore understood. She raised her hand. They got the news fast. Let them in. She wanted to see what kind of trouble they would come up with this time. A moment later, third Aunt Ning and second young lady Ning were led in. When third Aunt Ning saw Ning Xuemore, she was stunned, but then her face showed an affectionate surprise. "Oh, Xuemore, where have you been these days? I missed you so much." Ning Xuemore also smiled. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Ning. Aunt Ning's arm must be better." Third Aunt Ning stiffened for a moment, then smiled again. Much better, much better. It's all thanks to Xuemore's medical skills. Our Ning family has such a talented woman like you. In the future, our Ning family will be prosperous." She then greeted the girl who came in. "Xueying, this is your little sister Xuemore. You haven't seen each other for 2 or 3 years, right? Get close to each other." Chapter 1089. Ning Xueying was a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her features were sharp and she looked a bit like her mother. Her appearance was above average and she could barely be considered a beauty if she was properly groomed. However, the arrogance in her features destroyed her beauty. She also greeted Ning Xuemore with a fake smile. "Little sister Xuemore, I haven't seen you in a few years and you've grown so much." Ning Xuemore had the memories of the original owner. She knew that before Marquis Ning died, Ning Xueying treated Ning Xuemore quite well. She called her little sister all day long. When Marquis Ning died, she immediately changed her attitude. She scolded Xuemore as trash every day and she lost the face of the Ning clan. She said such words too often. She used the fact that she was a genius to bully the young Ning Xuemore. She even secretly kicked Ning Xuemore off a cliff once. If Ning Xuemore didn't happen to be hanging on a tree, she would have died at that time. Ning Xueying had not returned home for 2 years. Although she had heard a lot about Ning Xuemore's deeds in her own sect, she still didn't believe that the once cowardly and lowly Ning Xuemore could create such a big wave. She felt that it was just a rumor. Now that she saw Ning Xuemore, she saw that her features were much prettier and her temperament was very different from before. Especially her clothes. They looked simple, but they were made of shark silk. A small piece of cloth was worth thousands of gold. It was comparable to all of her belongings. This made her feel unbalanced. She turned her head and her gaze landed on Shinjoli, who had been calmly drinking tea at the side. Her eyes lit up and she walked forward. This is Celestial Master Han? She couldn't see Shinjoli's face clearly. She only felt that he was very handsome and extraordinary. He was 100 times more handsome than all of her senior and junior brothers combined. Ning Xueying immediately bowed towards Shinjoli. She purposely softened her tone. Ning Xueying greets Celestial Master Han. She still had a soft and pleasant voice, which was described by her fellow disciples as the most enchanting voice. It was very good at seducing men. In the sect, she even used this voice to seduce a martial uncle to prostrate himself under her skirt. She thought that this coquettish bow would attract Master Han to look at her a few times, and then gently allow her to stand up. But the reality was harsh. Master Han didn't even look at her. He was still leisurely sipping his tea. Ning Xueying bowed there for a long time until her waist was sore, but she still didn't hear the other party say the word remove. For a moment, she froze there, not knowing whether to get up or not. Ning Xueying naturally wouldn't help her out. She just crossed her arms and watched. She was happy to watch the show. Third Aunt Ning loved her daughter dearly and hurriedly used other words to help her daughter out. Xueying, come here. You haven't been close to your younger sister Xueying for a long time. You two have a good chat. Ning Xueying took the opportunity to get up and walk over. I heard that younger sister Xueying has become the Overlord's disciple. Congratulations, congratulations. She said congratulations, but her eyes were full of jealousy. Ning Xueying lightly replied, well said, well said. She didn't feel like exchanging pleasantries with the mother and daughter. What brings you here? Third Aunt Ning exclaimed. Xueying, third aunt and your second sister came specially to see you. We are a family, so we should be intimate. Xueying, now that you have become the Overlord's disciple, you are the glory of the entire Ning family. Chapter 1090. Xueying, you don't know this, but when you succeeded in becoming his disciple, the entire Ning family was overjoyed. They set off firecrackers for several days and held banquets for several days. Xueying, we're family. Now that you've flown to a higher branch, don't forget to support your family. Your sister Xueying also wants to enter the Sun-Moon sect, and it's best if she can also become the ancestor's disciple. That way, you two sisters will have each other's company, right? Why don't you plead with the ancestor and ask him to accept Xueying? Ning Xueying knew that this mother and daughter pair must have come with a request, but she didn't expect that they would actually ask for this. She almost couldn't help but want to laugh. Before she could open her mouth, Tom, who was beside her, burst out laughing. You're just picking up scraps. Do you think the ancestor is? What kind of Tom, Dick, and Harry want to become his disciple? Ning Xueying's expression changed, and she fiercely glared at Tom. She should have suffered some kind of loss from Tom, so she didn't dare to get angry after being ridiculed by him. She only sneered. To put it bluntly, Sister Xueying's psychokinesis is still trash, but didn't you also become the ancestor's disciple? This little girl has already cultivated to the 5th rank of the human step, and is known as a genius. The 5th rank of the human step is also called a genius. Tom couldn't help but laugh. The frog at the bottom of the well is short-sighted. He spoke these few sentences in Chinese, and unexpectedly, he didn't say anything wrong. Ning Xueying lazily said, Uncle Zhong, see the guests out. Ning Xueying steeled her heart and stared at Ning Xueying. Sister Xueying, did you become angry from embarrassment after hearing sister speak the truth? Then sister will apologize to sister. She said that, but she didn't have the slightest intention of apologizing. She took another step forward and reached out to hold Ning Xueying's hand. Little sister, we haven't been close for a long time. Ning Xueying didn't dodge. Ning Xueying's fingers were grabbing Ning Xueying's wrist. She suddenly channeled her psyche power, and her 5 fingers were like 5 iron claws, trying to pinch Ning Xueying's pulse. She wanted to make Ning Xueying cry like a ghost and make her lose face. However, she did not expect that as soon as she exerted strength in her fingers, she would feel the psychokinesis in her body rushing towards the other party. She could not stop it even if she wanted to. The other party was absorbing her psychokinesis. Ning Shuiying's expression changed drastically. She hurriedly tried to withdraw her hand, but her fingers seemed to be stuck to the other party's wrist. She couldn't withdraw her hand at all. Outsiders only saw her and Ning Shuimo holding each other's wrists intimately. How could they know her pain? Third Aunt Ning thought that her daughter had the upper hand. Her old face was full of pride. She stole a glance at Shenjiuli's expression. Shenjiuli was still expressionless. It was as if he turned a blind eye to this scene. Third Aunt Ning mocked Ning Shuimo in her heart. A concubine was a concubine. She would not be noticed by the high and mighty Celestial Master Han. Even if she was at a disadvantage, Celestial Master Han couldn't be bothered to care. Ning Shuimo was just a good-looking girl. After all, she was a good-for-nothing and a jinx. It was understandable that Celestial Master Han didn't care about her. If her daughter married him, with her ability to attract men, Celestial Master Han would definitely dote on her. Third Aunt Ning stood there. Before she could finish her daydream, she suddenly heard a muffled groan. She subconsciously raised her head and saw her daughter suddenly fly out like a rag. With a bang, she stuck to the wall and fell to the ground with a scream, Shuiying. Third Aunt Ning panicked and rushed over to help her daughter up. Chapter 1091. Ning Shuiying also struggled on the ground, trying to get up. She did not expect that as soon as she lifted her upper body, her body would soften and she would fall to the ground again. Her forehead hit the ground heavily. Third Aunt Ning was speechless. Ning Shuiying's forehead was bruised. She tried hard to get up again, but her waist went soft again. She kowtowed again. Just like that, she kowtowed 3 times in a row, until a big bruise appeared on her forehead. Only then did she manage to get up. Ning Shuimo smiled lazily. Why do you have to change from arrogance to deference? We're sisters, you don't have to apologize so much. Ning Shuiying was speechless. Ning Shuimo gestured to Uncle Zhong and ordered, send the guests out. Ning Shuiying's face was pale. She could feel that all the strength in her body had been drained. She could not find any psychokinesis in her body. In other words, she had lost all her psychokinesis. She had become a useless person. She widened her eyes and stared at Ning Shuimo. You. What kind of sorcery did you use? Ning Shuimo glanced at her coldly. You dare to call the Sun Moon sect's sorcery a sorcery? Ning Shuiying was speechless. Uncle Zhong had long found this mother and daughter pair unpleasing to his eyes. In the past few months when Ning Shuimo wasn't around, this mother and daughter pair had visited the Zhong residence many times. They wanted to take advantage of the Zhong residence, but after being rudely chased away by Tom several times, they finally calmed down. Third Aunt Ning did not know what had happened. She only knew that her daughter had suffered a great loss in the hands of Ning Shuimo. She hated it in her heart. Now that this little bitch had taken the ancestor as her master, her martial arts must have improved. They could not afford to offend her anymore. She was more sensible. She knew that it would not be good to offend Ning Shuiying at this time, so she took a step back. Shuimo, you're now Marquis Ning. You're also Celestial Master Han's disciple and the ancestor's disciple. You can be considered glorious. You can't forget your roots and our Ning family. After all, the Ning family's blood flows in your body. You have to help our Ning family. Now that you're not at home all year round, we can't let an outsider take care of the Ning residence. How about this, you hand the Ning residence to us. We promise to take good care of it for you. It turned out that they were eyeing the entire Ning mansion's wealth. Ning Shuimo smiled and tilted her head to look at her. You want to take care of the Ning mansion? Yes, your third aunt is good at taking care of the family. Third Aunt Ning almost puffed out her chest. Is your face that big? Ning Shuimo added in disdain. Third Aunt Ning was speechless. Ning Shuimo took another sip of tea and said indifferently, the family business in this residence was earned by me, Ning Shuimo. It has nothing to do with the Ning family. Tom, from today onwards, the Ning mansion will be handed over to you. In the future, if any Tom, Dick, or Harry claims to be your relative, feel free to kick them out. Tom was stunned. He glanced at Ning Shuamore and immediately replied, "Okay." Third Aunt Ning jumped up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. "What? You want to give the Ning mansion to an outsider?" "No. No. The whole Ning family won't agree." Before she could finish, Ning Shuamore looked at Tom with a faint smile. "Tom, someone is shouting in your house." Tom's handsome face tightened. He lifted Third Aunt Ning up with one hand like a chick. "Get lost." Then, Third Aunt Ning was thrown out by Tom like a ball. Third Aunt Ning flew through the air and howled, "Arr, help, mother." Ning Shuang screamed and rushed out. Chapter 1092. The annoying flies were finally driven out. Ning Shuamore believed that they would never come again. As for Ning Shuang, she had already become a real waste. She would also taste the pain that Ning Shuamore had experienced in the past. In the future, Ning Shuamore would not have many opportunities to return to the Ning residence. It was unreasonable for the Ning residence to be without a master all year round. After a long time, it would be easy to be targeted by people with ulterior motives. It was better to give it to Tom, who had no relatives or friends. This fellow was a genius in business. She believed that the Ning residence would be able to flourish in his hands. However, Tom was after all a beast who had cultivated into a human. He had to find a proper identity so that he could stay in peace. Ning Shuamore had an idea. She asked Tom to change his surname to Ning and let him stay as Marquis Ning's adopted son. This way, it would be proper for him to inherit the Ning residence. Tom originally had no parents in this era. Now that he could have a normal identity, he was naturally willing. He even gave himself the name Ning Tianyu. Ning Shuamore simply brought him to the government and registered him as a permanent resident. She had a special identity now. The Ministry of Revenue naturally would not make things difficult for her. They happily registered Ning Tianyu and made him a real member of the Ning residence. The news of Master Han's return was like a bird with wings, spreading in the capital. Le Hin Thai naturally also received the news. He immediately led the civil and military officials to welcome him. Ning Shuamore originally did not want to meet Le Hin Thai and the others with the Almighty. However, Shinjoli directly kept her by his side, saying that he did not want her to leave his sight. Therefore, she could only sit with him in the hall of the Taoist master residence. When she saw Le Hin Thai and the others, they came to greet her. Ji Yunhao actually came too. After not seeing him for half a year, he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. He also seemed to have calmed down a lot. He stood in the hall and greeted Shinjoli. His gaze fell on Ning Shuamore, faintly complicated. This girl used to be his fiancée. He mistook her for trash and threw her away. When he realized her good points, she could no longer return to his side. He missed it. What had he missed? After all, he was a playboy who often mingled in romantic situations, so he was quite good at judging women. He could tell at a glance that Ning Shuamore was still a virgin. Master Han did not consummate their marriage. A glimmer of hope suddenly rose in his heart. Perhaps he still had a chance. After he finished paying his respects, he finally couldn't help but ask, will Great Master still let Miss Ning be a concubine? Ning Shuamore's heart skipped a beat. What was her position in the Almighty's heart? She had already removed her status as a concubine, so what kind of status did the Almighty want her to have? Ning Shuamore's gaze also shifted to the great god, wanting to see how he would respond. Shinjoli didn't even glance at Ji Yunhao. Of course, he also ignored his question. Ji Yunhao didn't dare to ask again after being snubbed. A servant reported from outside, His Highness the Crown Prince has come to pay his respects. Ning Shuamore's expression changed. Tomorrow was Ji Yunhuang's wedding. She did not expect that he would still have the time to visit the Celestial Master residence. A moment later, Ji Yunhuang came in. He actually didn't come alone. There was a young girl beside him, a young girl around 12 or 13 years old. That young girl had a pair of lively eyes, a high nose, and full cherry red lips. When she looked at people, she tilted her head slightly. She was very cute. Ji Yunhuang held the girl's hand and walked in. He respectfully cupped his hands towards Shenjiuli. He even pulled the girl beside him. Shui Mo, this is the celestial master Han that I often mentioned to you. Quickly come and pay your respects. Chapter 1093. The girl naturally went forward to greet him. Even a blind person could see how much he cared for the girl. Shenjiuli's eyes darkened slightly, but he did not say anything. Ning Xuemo's heart sank. Tomorrow was Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing's wedding. Why did Ji Yunhuang bring another girl to greet them today? While she was pondering, Ji Yunhuang had already greeted her. Martial Aunt Xuemo, long time no see. How have you been? Ning Xuemo looked at Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang did not look any different from when she had met him on the mountain. His eyes were slightly lowered, and she could not see his state of mind. He had always known how to hide his emotions, and now he was even more profound. His face was as calm as water, and it was hard for others to see any fluctuations in his emotions. Ning Xuemo exchanged a few words with him, and her gaze fell on the girl beside him. She did not know why, but she felt that this girl seemed a little familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen her before. Especially when she tilted her head to look at people, it gave her an indescribable sense of familiarity. Greetings to Martial Aunt Ning. The girl greeted her cheerfully. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat, and she looked at Ji Yunhuang. Sun Moon sect's rules state that non-disciples cannot address each other as martial aunt or senior brother, unless that person is a family member of a Sun Moon sect disciple. Ji Yunhuang smiled. Don't worry, Yunhuang does not dare to break the sect's rules. Shui Mo is Yunhuang's future Zhao Yi. Ning Xuemo's fingers that were holding the teacup tightened slightly, and Tian Xueqing's figure suddenly flashed in her mind. She suddenly understood everything. Tian Xueqing was forcefully given to Ji Yunhuang by the great god. Ji Yunhuang was afraid that the great god had a knot in his heart because of this, so he purposely brought another girl to greet the great god. This was equivalent to making the great god unhappy. Ning Xuemo could not help but look at Shenjiuli. Shenjiuli sat there indifferently, as calm as before, without any reaction. However, this was within Ning Xuemo's expectations. The Almighty was a calm emperor, and it was extremely difficult to see any changes in his expression. Ning Xuemo looked at Le Hin Thai again. Le Hin Thai obviously knew about it. He only looked at his son disapprovingly and didn't say anything. Ji Yunhuang doted on the girl called Shui Mo. From time to time, he would hold her hand and look at her with a gentle gaze. The crown prince's wedding was not a small matter. There were many complicated procedures involved. Le Hin Thai naturally asked Han Shanyu to preside over the wedding ceremony for Ji Yunhuang. Shenjiuli's gaze landed on Ji Yunhuang's body. He opened his mouth and spoke a few words that sounded like a Buddhist hymn. When I do things, I don't do it by chance. I'm just going with the flow. Don't lose yourself. Ji Yunhuang stared blankly for a moment before he smiled faintly. Heavenly teacher, I will definitely remember your wondrous words. However, he laughed coldly in his heart. This person had snatched away the person he loved and forced another person onto him. Why did he say something like a Buddhist hymn? It was nothing more than letting him follow the will of the heavens and accept his fate. Shenjiuli looked at him for a moment and did not say anything else. The meeting ended with everyone having their own thoughts. The moon in the sky was as big as a round plate. A few wisps of white clouds floated in the sky, occasionally covering half of the moon's face. In the small pavilion, the chess moves on the chessboard were slightly messy. Shenjiuli stood in the small pavilion with his back facing the body. He looked up at the moon in the sky and seemed to be lost in thought. When Ning Xuemo finished bathing and came out, she saw such a scene. Did he have something on his mind? Ning Xuemo walked to the chess table and looked at it. This game of chess was not at the level of the Almighty. Chapter 1094. Ning Xuemore looked at the chessboard. It seemed that the Almighty was just playing absent-mindedly. It was rare for him to have something on his mind. Ning Xuemore crossed her arms and leaned against the pillar without saying a word. "Are you done?" Shenjioli turned around and looked at her slowly. Ning Xuemore took a bath in the hot spring in the Celestial Master's residence. Her hair was still half wet, and her face was still bright red from the steam. She looked like a red apple with dewdrops hanging on it, making people want to take a bite. Shenjioli raised his hand and wanted to pull her into his arms. Ning Xuemore dodged his fingers and leaned against another pillar. Shenjioli was speechless. She seemed to have distanced herself from him these days. Since the day he failed to force her to marry him on the ice field, she no longer allowed him to kiss or hug her. He slowly lowered his arm and sat down at the small table. "Play a game with me." Ning Xuemore peeled a grape and threw it into her mouth. "I'm not interested at the moment. Almighty, I'm here to bid farewell to you." "Bid farewell? Where are you going?" Shenjioli looked up at her. "Back to the Ning residence, of course. I'm not your concubine anymore and your Han Shan Yu. I can't live with you in the Taoist master's residence as your disciple. I don't have any status and it's inappropriate for me to stay here. So I'd better go back to the Ning residence. Don't worry, I'll attend the Crown Prince's wedding tomorrow. I won't miss it." Shenjioli looked at her for a moment and kept the chessboard. He didn't ask her to stay and only said, "Okay, I'll send you." Ning Xuemore was speechless. She felt a little anxious and turned to leave. "No need, it's just a few steps away." She walked very quickly and left the courtyard in a moment. Because it was winter and the sky was dark, there were very few people on the street. The few who passed by were in a hurry. Ning Xuemore came to the street and was blown by the cold wind. She calmed down. He patted his head. What was wrong with him? Recently, he seemed to have become more calculative. Perhaps the Almighty had something that he couldn't say. The Almighty had his own reasons. Why did he have to haggle over a matter of status with him? Everything would be clear once he reached level 8, so there was no need to rush. Before reaching LV8, he would just enjoy his free and easy life. She simply sang at the top of her lungs. The heavenly Duke tilted slightly, spilling a pot of wine. How many transformations are there in the human world? Heaven's will is outstanding. She raised her eyebrows and stored her noble spirit in her chest. She was 70% crazy and 30% gentle. Truth and falsehood were both sought after. Fame and fortune were exchanged for wine. Sound and appearance are but skin and hair, flesh and blood. The world is full of worries. How many people can be carefree? Leaning on a tall building alone, there would always be people singing and waiting. It's hard to control my wild nature. I will decide whether I stay or leave. After singing, the gloominess in her heart seemed to lessen. Ning Xuemore strode forward and attracted the attention of passers-by. She didn't care and sang even louder. What a good fame and fortune are exchanged for wine. Sound and appearance are but skin and hair, flesh and blood. Someone clapped a few times from upstairs. The sound of the clapping was crisp and clear in the night. The voice was vaguely familiar. Ning Xuemore heard the voice and looked up. She saw a person standing on the second floor of a restaurant. She was wearing an ordinary green gown and looked thin. Although the night was hazy, Ning Xuemore could see her face clearly. It was the Crown Prince's consort, Tian Xueqing in men's clothing. Ning Xuemore was stunned. Tian Xueqing looked at her and shook the wine cup in her hand. "Are you interested in coming up for a drink?" Chapter 1095. Ning Xuemore did not say anything. Her body moved and she was already standing on the second floor. She smiled and said, "Why not? Miss Ning is indeed a straightforward person." Tian Xueqing smiled and said, "Please, please." Ning Xuemore did not stand on ceremony and followed her to the table. They sat opposite each other. This table was located in a very remote location and there was a screen in front of it, so it could barely be separated from the other tables. Because it was already past mealtime, There were not many people eating on the second floor. There were only a few tables of 2s and 3s, and they were all far away from Tian Xueqing's table. No one noticed that there was an extra Ning Xuemore at this table. Tian Xueqing was not a talkative person. Normally, she was even a little taciturn. However, tonight, she drank some wine and was a little tipsy. Her temperament changed slightly and she was no longer as cold as before. She even took the initiative to say a few words. Ning Xuemore was not a meddlesome person. She did not need to ask to know why Tian Xueqing came out to drink on the eve of her wedding. Although she sympathized with her, she could not say anything. Both of them had their own thoughts as they drank. After drinking 3 cups of wine, Tian Xueqing looked at her and said, "Miss Ning, I have heard about you from him." Her voice was still cold. Ning Xuemore naturally knew who she was referring to. She smiled faintly and said, "The Crown Prince and I are only friends. Previously, Xuemore was saved by him once. You don't need to misunderstand." Ning Xuemore did not want this girl to misunderstand her relationship with Ji Yunhuang. Tian Xueqing raised her hand and drank a cup of wine. Her voice was still calm as she said, "Don't misunderstand. I don't have any other intentions. I am also not jealous. I just don't want you to have any regrets." Ning Xuemore was speechless. This was not a good topic to talk about. Ning Xuemore bluntly said, "I won't have any regrets. The Crown Prince is my friend and I only treat him as a friend. That's all." Tian Xueqing lowered her eyes slightly and said, "Sorry, I don't know how to speak properly. I said the wrong thing. I will punish myself by drinking 3 cups. She nimbly raised her hand and poured 3 cups for herself. Then, she drank them down without hesitation. She didn't seem to be a drinker, and her cheeks were as red as rouge. Ning Xuemore. Tian Xueqing's face was flushed red, but her eyes were as calm as a lake. "Miss Ning, I used to dislike you." Ning Xuemore also drank a glass of wine and said directly, "I can tell." Her man had his heart set on another woman. Even if he knew that the other woman was innocent, it was difficult for him to like her. It was already good enough that he didn't plot against her behind her back. Tian Xueqing smiled. "But I don't hate you. I don't hate anyone. I only hate my own fate. My fate isn't good." Ning Xuemore raised her hand and drank a glass of wine. "I don't believe in fate." Tian Xueqing sat there and smiled again. "I didn't believe it in the past either. I once fought against this fate, but the result of my struggle was eternal damnation." Ning Xuemore glanced at her and sympathized with her. However, feelings couldn't be forced. Tian Xueqing was casually given to Ji Yunhuang by the ancestor. Ji Yunhuang suffered a loss and naturally felt indignant. It was inevitable that he would vent his anger on Tian Xueqing. Tian Xueqing probably drank too much tonight, so she started to talk more. "Actually, I have known him for a long time." This was Tian Xueqing's first sentence. Ning Xuemore raised her eyebrows and didn't interrupt. She waited for Tian Xueqing to continue. Chapter 1096. I was raised as a medicine man since I was young. Naturally, I wasn't willing to accept such a fate. In the winter when I was 12, I finally snuck out. I had never experienced the ways of the world, so I didn't know anything about the outside world. Fortunately, my martial arts weren't bad, so I didn't suffer much during those few days of wandering around. After I escaped, Father sent out many people to find me. In order to avoid these pursuers, I actually had a hard time dealing with them. She paused for a moment before continuing. "Later on, when I was avoiding the pursuers, I was saved by a man." She smiled bitterly. "That man bought me many clothes and toys to make me happy. At that time, I was still young and naive, so I treated that man as my benefactor and foolishly left with him. When we reached a desolate wilderness, that man's true colors were revealed. It turned out that he was a flower thief with quite a reputation. His martial arts weren't bad, and he gave me a type of medicine like tendons softening powder. I couldn't resist, and when I was in despair, the Crown Prince happened to pass by." When she spoke up to hear, Tian Xueqing's eyes lit up slightly. She seemed to have recalled that time when that white-clothed young man had descended from the sky when she was at her lowest point of despair. He'd beaten up that rapist and saved her innocence. He saved me. At that time, he had only just entered the Sun-Moon sect, and was in high spirits. At that time, he wasn't so cold. Because my clothes were torn, he even gave me his robe. After that, he sent me to the town, and left a few dozen taels of silver before leaving. Later on, I was still found by father's men and brought back. From then on, I never had the chance to leave Tianqing Castle. So you already knew him. Then when you met, did he recognize you? Ning Xuemo asked. Tian Xueqing slowly shook her head, and a bitter smile appeared on her lips. We didn't recognize each other for a long time. He had seen too many women, so how could he remember me, a person he had met by chance? Furthermore, at that time, we didn't exchange our names, so I thought that I would never see him again. Until that day. Mr. Han gave me to him. When I met him, he was only 14 years old. When we met again, he was already a grown man and had changed a lot. When I recognized him, I wanted to thank God that I could finally see him again and become his wife. When he held my hand, I think I was crazy with joy. Ning Xuemo. She could understand Tian Xueqing's joy. A girl named Floating Duckweed was able to marry the man she liked. The joy in her heart was simply bubbling. After my father got me engaged to him, he wanted to bring me back to Tianqing Castle to prepare for the wedding, but I was really afraid. I was afraid that this wasn't real. I was afraid that my father would suddenly go back on his word and give me to someone else, so I did everything I could to stay. I stayed in the courtyard that His Majesty had prepared for me. I think I'm crazy. I know that I'm going to marry him soon, but I still want to see him. She paused for a moment before continuing. Like an idiot, I snuck near the entrance of the Crown Prince's residence, just so that I could see him when he went out. Taking a look was also good. I could like it for a few days just by taking a look. At that time, the vast Sky Empire was preparing for our marriage. My father also sent someone over again to officially set the date of our marriage. I was really happy. I even stopped secretly hating my father. Chapter 1097. Ning Xuemo looked at her porcelain-like skin and opened her mouth, wanting to ask something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. She didn't interrupt her. Tian Xueqing continued, that night, I was very happy and secretly went to the Crown Prince's residence to see him. I just happened to see him coming out. He came out alone and didn't bring any attendants with him. For some reason, I quietly followed him. He seemed to have a lot on his mind and didn't notice me. I followed him to a restaurant. At first, I thought he had an appointment with someone, but after I went in, I found out that he was drinking alone in a corner. Tian Xueqing lowered her eyes and was silent for a moment. Later, he got drunk and staggered out of the door. Naturally, I followed him. He drank too much and fell down not long after he went out. I helped him up and wanted to send him back to the Crown Prince's residence. But he kept saying that he didn't want to go back, so I carried him back to my post house. Ning Xuemo. That night, you two did it. Tian Xueqing lowered her eyes and answered with a single word, yes. She then smiled bitterly, you might not believe me, but when I first carried him back, I didn't have any other thoughts. I just didn't want him to sleep on the streets. I also arranged for him to sleep in the guest room. He was too drunk and even vomited wine on himself. I didn't have a coachman by my side, only 2 maids. I didn't want the maids to serve him, so I personally wiped him down. Then, I was pulled onto the bed by him. She sighed, I know you must think that he was drunk, but I wasn't. With my martial arts, if I didn't want to do it with him, I should have been able to push him away easily. Yes, I could have done it. But at that time, it was as if I was possessed. I thought that since I was already engaged to him, he was my rightful husband. I also liked him so much, so. She smiled again, but her smile was somewhat bitter. Only then did I know that he had someone in his heart. That night, when Ji Yunhuang pressed her under his body and entered her, he was calling out Ning Xuemo's name. At that time, She felt as if she had been struck by lightning, but what was done could not be undone. There was nothing she could do. Ning Xuemore did not say anything. She naturally knew who Ji Yunhuang had in his heart, but she was unable to reciprocate his feelings. She knew that she was in Ji Yunhuang's heart, but she didn't expect him to be so persistent. And then? Ning Xuemore cleverly changed the topic. Then, when he woke up the next day, he realized that what was done with me had already been done. He was furious, and scolded me before leaving in a huff. How was he just scolding? He almost wanted to chop her into pieces. He had sent her flying with a single slap, causing her to spit out blood. It turned out that such a cultured and refined person was so terrifying when he was angry. His disdainful gaze almost nailed her to death. Ning Xuemore couldn't help but sigh again, then he turned back. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought her to the Sun Moon sect to report the good news. Tian Xueqing drank another cup of wine and faintly said, "You should know that my body is very special. It's a cauldron that can help men recover and increase their psychokinesis, but it also has a fatal flaw. Once I'm with someone, that person cannot leave me for 3 years. We have to be together once every 2 days." Chapter 1098. Otherwise, all of his psychokinesis will disappear and he will slowly die. My father did not tell me about this characteristic at first. Later on, when he found out that we had a good relationship, he told me about this characteristic. He even said that it was for my own good. He was afraid that someone would throw me away after using me up, and that I would be loved for at least 3 years. Ning Xuemore was speechless. So cauldrons had this characteristic as well. Then, how did the crown prince know about this? My father went to tell him. Can you imagine how angry he was when he found out the truth? He came to find me the next night and told me that he would marry me as I wished, but he would only treat me as a cauldron for the rest of his life and would never treat me as his woman. Ning Xuemore was speechless. She could not blame Ji Yunhuang for treating Tian Xueqing coldly. In his heart, he probably thought that Tian Xueqing had taken the opportunity to scheme against him. So, you can blame me for this and not him. If only I did not escape when I was 12 years old, I would not have met him, I would not have. She would not have lost her heart and caused herself to be consigned to eternal damnation. This story made people feel helpless. Ning Xuemore could not help but sigh. Then what are you going to do in the future? Tian Xueqing paused for a moment and shook her head slightly. I don't know. She picked up a cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. She had never entered his circle of friends. He almost never introduced her to his friends. Even when he occasionally went out with her, he would completely ignore her. It was as if she was invisible and did not exist. She had always been isolated. At this moment, she was sitting there with an upright posture. Her figure was tall and straight, but it also gave off an inexplicably cold and lonely feeling. Looking at her like this, Ning Xuemore felt pity for her. Tian Xueqing was born very beautiful. As a woman, Ning Xuemore felt that she was very pleasing to the eye. Ji Yunhuang really did not know how lucky he was. However, with Ji Yunhuang's temperament, if she wanted him to really accept her, she was afraid that there was still a long way to go. What's more, Ji Yunhuang now had an ink-painting little girl by his side. Tian Xueqing drank another glass of wine. I'm going to marry him tomorrow, but I know he hates me. I can't stop him from hating me. In the future, he will still hate me. Ning Xuemore couldn't bear it. You don't have to worry too much. That's just a hypothesis. In any case, you're going to be his crown princess tomorrow and you have the Tianqing castle to support you. Even if he treats you coldly, he won't do anything to you. When he ascends the throne, you will be his empress. As long as you don't make any big mistakes, you will be able to live a peaceful life. How many emperors in this world truly loved their empress? Didn't those empresses also live their entire lives in glory? Of course, the prerequisite was that she didn't want the love of the emperor. She looked at Tian Xueqing again and felt a little worried for her. With her cold personality, would she really be able to live a peaceful life in the harem where women gathered together and there was constant infighting? What's more, Ji Yunhuang hated her so much. No. Tian Xueqing suddenly raised her head and said in a calm voice, "If he doesn't like me, I won't stay by his side. I'll give myself 3 years. If he continues to hate me in these 3 years, I will leave him. I won't be a stumbling block for him." Ning Xuemo felt relieved for her. This girl was actually a proud person. She was not the kind of person who was completely at the mercy of fate. Chapter 1099. This girl was only 17 years old this year. 3 years later, when she finished her task as a cauldron, Ji Yunhuang could leave her. She was only 20 years old, so if she really couldn't do it, it would not be too late for her to leave. However, by that time, she would already be the crown princess. According to the rules of this era, even if Ji Yunhuang abolished her position as the crown princess, he would not divorce her. Of course, he would not let her marry someone else. The imperial family usually treated their unwanted concubines by banishing them to the cold palace. After 3 years, how much of your martial arts will you have left? Ning Xuemo could not help but ask. My cauldron can only help one person increase their martial arts. After 3 years, my medicinal body will completely disappear, but my martial arts will not disappear too much. I should have no problem protecting myself in Jianghu. Tian Xueqing was also a smart person. She had obviously thought of the problem that Ning Xuemo was worried about. Her voice was indifferent and cold. I will conceal my identity and live the life of an ordinary person. I will give him complete freedom. At that time, he will only need to announce that I have passed away. It turned out that she had already thought of a way out. As expected, she did not blindly go with the flow. Ning Xuemo could not help but size her up again. Her gaze was filled with admiration. It was not easy for a girl in this era to have such thought. She poured a cup of wine and raised it. Xueqing, I toast you. The two of them drank 1 cup and unknowingly, more than 2 hours had passed. The two of them drank quite a lot. Ning Xuemo's alcohol tolerance was very good. She was the type that would not get drunk after 1,000 cups. However, Tian Xueqing's alcohol tolerance was also very good. After drinking so much, other than her face being a little red, she was still sober. She did not even stutter when she spoke. Of course, she was more talkative than usual. Perhaps it was because she had always been alone and did not have any friends. It was rare for her to meet someone who was willing to drink and chat with her, so she was able to talk a lot. For example, her experience when she was refined into a medicinal body. For example, her experience in Tianqing Castle. She played it down, but Ning Xuemo was shaken to the core when she heard it. Cauldrons were extremely difficult to refine. Not only did they need a specific birth date and 8 characters, they also needed a strong constitution. Because she had to soak in the medicinal bath every day, the water was so hot that it could almost burn off a layer of her skin. At that time, she had to soak in the boiling hot water for 6 hours every day. Furthermore, he had to drink all kinds of medicine every day. If he wasn't careful, he would be poisoned by the medicine and struggle on the verge of death. Under the effects of these drugs, a layer of her skin would peel off like a snake shedding its skin every year. Every time her skin peeled off, she would be in so much pain that she wanted to roll around. However, every time she shed her skin would become even more tender and smooth. Ning Xuemo had never thought that a man-made cauldron would actually have to suffer like this. He had never expected that there would be such a heartless father in this world who would use his own daughter to refine a cauldron weapon. Tian Xueqing's position in the Tianqing castle was awkward. Everyone knew that she was a cauldron that would be given away. On the surface, they were polite and respectful to her, but in reality, no one treated her as a friend. She also didn't have the time to make friends. Apart from soaking in medicinal baths, she also practiced martial arts under the guidance of an arcane master. This was because the higher her martial arts, the more useful she would be as a cauldron. This torturous life continued until she was 16. At 16, she finally became a perfect cauldron that even the Tianqing castle lord was proud of. Then, she was given away. Then, due to a mishap, she was about to become the crown princess of Ji Yunhuang. Chapter 1100. Shuemor, do you know? When I was being refined, I was suffering. I told myself that everything would be fine after I turned 16. After I turned 16, I would be able to live a normal life. I didn't want to be rich, I just wanted to be ordinary. Until I met him. I thought that the heavens were finally looking after me. It turned out that I could also obtain happiness. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, it would be like the moon reflected in the water. Ning Shuemor took a deep breath. You don't have to be so dispirited. Actually, you can also be happy. A woman's happiness can't only be given by a man. You can also be happy yourself. I can still be happy. Tian Xueqing's eyes were like a lake. There seemed to be dark waves surging in her calm eyes. In the end, she was only a 17-year-old girl. No matter how calm she was, she still had the longing of a young girl. You can. Ning Shuemor only replied with 2 words. She secretly made up her mind that she would come to Vast Sky Empire again 3 years later to see this crown princess. If she still didn't obtain happiness at that time and really wanted to leave, then Ning Shuemor would use her own methods to help this girl. Thank you. Tian Xueqing smiled. She was born cold, so when she smiled, it was like a red plum blossom suddenly blooming in the snow. The waiter who came to refill their wine was also stunned. Ning Shuemor raised her wine cup and smiled. The two drank a few more cups. Then, the sound of the night watch came from the street. Ning Shuemor stood up. It's getting late. You should go back. I'll attend your wedding tomorrow. Tian Xueqing also stood up, but she suddenly swayed a few times and almost fell down. Ning Shuemor raised her hand to support her. Are you okay? Did this girl drink too much? The redness on Tian Xueqing's face gradually faded. She pursed her thin lips. I'm fine. Her body swayed again and was about to collapse. I'll send you back. Ning Shuemor didn't hesitate to support her. Where are you staying now? No need, I'll go back by myself. Tian Xueqing finally stood up straight. Suddenly, there was some movement downstairs. Then, she heard the waiter lead 2 people upstairs. The waiter's voice was full of respect. Would your highness like a single room? Your highness. Ning Shuemor raised her eyebrows and leaned out to take a look. Then, she was slightly startled. The 2 people who came in were the crown prince, Ji Yunhuang, and the little beauty called Shui Mo. Ji Yunhuang was obviously a little tipsy as his body swayed slightly. However, he did not have any intention of asking for a private room. No need. This hall is fine. It's bright and spacious. The waiter naturally wouldn't disobey him and arranged for them to sit at a well-lit table. Their position was close to the staircase, so unless Ning Shuemor and Xiao Luo jumped out of the window, they would not be able to escape Ji Yunhuang's line of sight. As long as they walked out of this small screen, they would come face to face with Ji Yunhuang. Ning Shuemor couldn't help but look at Tian Xueqing. Tian Xueqing's face was slightly pale. She sat down again and didn't say anything. She picked up the wine and drank another cup. Ning Shuemor frowned. After thinking for a while, she sat down as well. With the arrival of the crown prince, the speed at which the dishes were served was naturally fast. After a while, the table was filled with sumptuous dishes. Your Highness, it's already late. You shouldn't drink anymore. You still have to get married tomorrow. It's not good to get drunk. The little girl called Shui Mo couldn't help but advise him. Ji Yunhuang drank a cup of wine and sneered. He lazily said, "Don't worry, this prince knows what to do." Chapter 1101. But you've already drunk a few jars of wine. Shui Mo did not give up. If you drink too much, how are you going to perform the ceremony tomorrow? Ji Yunhuang snorted. Even if I'm drunk and can't get up tomorrow, Imperial Father will still let people carry me to the end of the ceremony. This is the position that woman schemed for. He seemed to have drunk too much and spoke more than usual. When he reached this point, he felt that he had made a mistake and stopped talking. He poured a cup of wine and said, "Don't mention that woman, let's drink. Ah Mo, this prawn is not bad, try it." He peeled the shell of a prawn and placed it on the plate in front of Shui Mo. Shui Mo tasted it and beamed with joy. It's really delicious. Your Highness, I want to eat more. Ji Yunhuang was very patient with her and peeled another prawn for her. Ning Xuemo's fingers held the wine cup tightly. Although she knew that Ji Yunhuang had a special liking for Shui Mo and wanted to take her as his concubine, it was not good for him to drink with another woman on the eve of his wedding with Tian Xueqing, right? He even showed off his love with this woman. As for Tian Xueqing's face was slightly pale, but there was no other expression on her face. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat. Looking at Tian Xueqing's reaction, it seemed that she often saw Ji Yunhuang treat Shui Mo like this. Outside, Ji Yunhuang doted on the girl called Shui Mo very much. From time to time, he would give her some food, and Shui Mo would enjoy it with a clear conscience. It was obvious that she was used to it. Ji Yunhuang drank wine as if he was drinking water. In just a moment, he had finished an entire jar of wine. Tian Xueqing sat there calmly. Other than her face being slightly pale, she did not have any other reaction. She wanted to wait until Ji Yunhuang left. If Ji Yunhuang did not leave, she would continue to drink here. The one who did something wrong was Ji Yunhuang, right? What was Tian Xueqing afraid of? What was there to be afraid of? Ning Xuemo felt a little stuffy. She put the wine cup on the table and said, Xueqing, it's getting late. Let's go back. She did not deliberately lower her voice. On the contrary, her voice was very clear. It was especially loud in this rather quiet restaurant. Clang. Something on Ji Yunhuang's table seemed to have fallen onto the ground and rolled around on the ground. The moment Ning Xuemo spoke, Tian Xueqing's face turned even paler, but she didn't say anything. She slowly stood up and said, Okay, let's go. Ning Xuemo and Tian Xueqing came out from behind the screen one after another, and they happened to come face to face with Ji Yunhuang, who had just stood up. The wine cup on Ji Yunhuang's table had disappeared and was rolling on the floor. However, his expression was calm, as though he was not worried about being caught. He did not even look at Tian Xueqing. Instead, he looked at Ning Xuemo with a complicated look in his eyes. Xuemo, I didn't expect to implicate you again today. Where did this come from? Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. What do you mean, Your Highness? Why didn't she understand? Ji Yunhuang finally looked at Tian Xueqing. His eyes were as cold as ice, without the slightest bit of warmth. He said indifferently, Tian Xueqing, this prince and Shui Mo are open and above board. She will be this prince's good wife in the future. You don't need to waste your efforts to let Xuemo know about this matter. She already knows about it. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Wait a minute. Did His Highness mean that Tian Xueqing had specially invited her to catch him and Shui Mo in the act? Did he think that Tian Xueqing deliberately followed him and then called her over? Chapter 1102. She was just passing by, alright? Furthermore, she and Tian Xueqing were here first. Your Highness, did you decide to come here on the spur of the moment or did you plan this beforehand? Ning Xuemo asked as she crossed her arms. Ji Yunhuang frowned slightly. Before he could say anything, Shui Mo, who was beside him, quickly said, We decided to come here on the spur of the moment. When we passed by just now, Your Highness wanted to drink more, so we came in. We didn't expect Sister Xueqing and Martial Uncle Ning to be here. Ning Xuemo smiled again. Then I don't understand what Your Highness said just now. Xueqing and I have been sitting here for almost 4 hours and we had a very harmonious conversation. However, Your Highness and Miss Shui have only been here for half an hour. We don't have the ability to predict the future, so how did it become Xueqing's scheme? Furthermore, she didn't specially invite me here. It was just a coincidence that we met by chance and drank a few cups of wine together. Your Highness, are you thinking too much? Ji Yunhuang was speechless. Ning Xuemo's words were really sharp. However, it also explained a lot of things. It seemed that he had misunderstood. He couldn't help but look at Tian Xueqing. Suddenly, his expression changed and he took a step forward. You drank? Tian Xueqing took a step back but tripped on something. She staggered and her face became even paler. The smell of alcohol on her body was not small. Ji Yunhuang could smell it clearly even before he got close to her. His face immediately darkened. Tian Xueqing, are you courting death? His voice was so cold that it was as if there were ice shards outside. Tian Xueqing had already straightened her body. She pursed her lips and didn't have any intention to speak. Although it was wrong to come out to drink on the eve of the wedding, it didn't mean that she was courting death, right? Ji Yunhuang's words were too much. Ning Xuemo was unhappy. She raised her eyebrows and was about to say something when Ji Yunhuang spoke again. If you want to court death, don't drag others down with you. Aren't you afraid that your maid won't be able to find you by coming out like this? Tian Xueqing's face slightly paled and said, I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing? Ji Yunhuang's voice raised a few octaves as he sneered. You know what you're doing is drinking on the eve of the wedding? Don't you find it embarrassing? You even dragged Xuemo to drink with you. I'll say one more thing. We just met by chance. We can't say who's involved who. Your Highness, you don't have to involve me. Ning Xuemo finally opened her mouth, and her voice was cold. Wasn't it just a drink? It wouldn't affect tomorrow's wedding, so why was Ji Yunhuang so angry? Ji Yunhuang was stunned. He finally realized that his words had put Ning Xuemo in an awkward position. His eyes darkened slightly. Xuemo, don't misunderstand. I don't mean to blame you, Ning Xuemo said indifferently, it's just a drink. I don't think the Crown Prince will get angry over it. Also, even though Miss Xueqing will be marrying you tomorrow, she's still free today. She can do whatever she wants and doesn't seem to need the permission of others. In Vast Sky Kingdom, it's normal for a lady to drink in a restaurant, so there's nothing shameful about it. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. He could faintly feel that Ning Xuemo was dissatisfied with him. Did this Tian Xueqing say something bad about him behind his back? Ji Yunhuang's gaze shifted to Tian Xueqing's face, and his expression suddenly changed. Tian Xueqing's face was already very pale. Her forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat, and she stood there swaying. Ning Xuemo turned her head and noticed Tian Xueqing's abnormality. She was shocked and hurriedly supported her, raising her hand to check her pulse. Ning Xuemo was still a little worried. Sort of. What other taboos does she have? Ning Xuemo glanced at the dishes on the table. Could there be taboos among them? Ji Yunhuang paused. In fact, other than certain foods, she can't eat anything else. Other foods are also poisonous to her. Ning Xuemo. So the price to pay for this cauldron was so high. Yunhuang, treat her better. It's not easy for her. She asked for it. Ji Yunhuang was not moved. Ning Xuemo was angry. Do you think she wants to be a drug maker? Do you think she wants to like you? She. The sound of footsteps came from behind. Tian Xueqing was walking back quickly. Chapter 1104. It seemed that the medicine that Ji Yunhuang gave her was really effective. Not long after she ate it, her complexion had already returned to normal after vomiting. She walked very quickly, and Shui Mo almost couldn't catch up with her. Xuemo, thank you. Tian Xueqing said. Thank you for being willing to accompany me and talk to me, so that I won't be so lonely anymore. Thank you for explaining to me. You almost implicated her, Ji Yunhuang coldly said. She didn't know the inside story and was drinking with you out of goodwill. If you died here because of drinking, she would become the suspect. Tian Xueqing, can you use your brain before you act so willfully? Tian Xueqing finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were as deep as a pool and as dark as the night, causing Ji Yunhuang's heart to inexplicably tighten. He couldn't continue speaking. I won't die. Tian Xueqing slowly opened her mouth. Her voice was as calm as the thick layer of snow outside. How can a scheming person like me be willing to die like this? Ji Yunhuang choked. You Tian Xueqing faintly smiled. That smile was extremely faint. I still want to be your crown princess. If I don't sit on that position, how can I die? After saying this, she no longer looked at Ji Yunhuang's ashen face. She turned around and walked down the stairs in large strides. Her qigong was not bad. In the blink of an eye, that lonely and thin figure disappeared into the snow. Ning Xuemore naturally didn't want to stay here any longer. Your Highness, please continue. I will also take my leave. She also walked out with large strides. When she entered the restaurant, there was still a full moon outside. However, after drinking for a few hours in the restaurant, it was already snowing outside. It seemed like the weather was about to change again. She braved the cold snow and directly walked towards the Ning residence. She drank a lot of wine, so she needed to have a good sleep so that she could attend the wedding tomorrow. She didn't feel anything when she was in the restaurant, but now that the cold wind was blowing outside, she felt a little dizzy and her vision blurred. She didn't know what she tripped over in her haste, but she staggered and almost fell. Suddenly, someone grabbed her arm and pulled her back to reality. Ning Xuemore fell into someone's arms. She raised her head and saw Shenjiuli's handsome face. She blinked her eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Almighty, which corner did you pop out from? Shenjiuli did not answer her drunken words. He directly carried her up by her waist and strode forward. Hey, where are you taking me? I want to go back to the Ning mansion. Ning Xuemore had drunk too much. Now that she was drunk, she started to throw a tantrum. I'll send you back to Ning mansion. I can walk by myself. I don't need you to send me off. Are you sure you can walk on your own? Shenjiuli finally put her down. Then, Ning Xuemore realized that her legs were miserably unable to move. They were stuck there like wooden stakes. It must be him. Ning Xuemore struggled a few times on the spot. She struggled until she was covered in sweat, but she didn't move a single step. Are you sober now? The Almighty floated by her side like an immortal. She was covered in sweat, so naturally, her drunkenness was reduced. Shenjiuli did not wait for her to answer. He picked her up again and continued to walk forward. I knew you couldn't walk. Ning Xuemore wanted to bite him, but after thinking about it, she decided not to. Since he was willing to carry her, it saved her a lot of energy. She simply buried her head in his chest and stopped tormenting him. She only muttered, "Thank you so much." Shenjiuli ignored her and carried her forward. The wind and snow filled the sky, but it didn't blow on them. Chapter 1105. Ning Xuemore felt sleepy and tipsy as she dozed off in his embrace. She said in a daze, "Great God, I feel like you look very familiar, Shenjiuli." They had already reached this point, yet she only said that he looked familiar. "Great God, I often dream of you." She muttered again. Shenjiuli's lips hooked up into a smile. "What you think of in the day, you dream of it at night." It seems like she really liked him, even dreaming of him. He looked down at her in his arms and kissed her on the lips. Recently, she had been at odds with him, so he hadn't kissed her in a long time. Her lips were full and soft with a faint wine fragrance. His heart was moved and he couldn't help but deepen the kiss. "Great God, you like me, right? But why didn't you propose to me?" She pouted in her dream. Shenjiuli, his eyes were slightly deep as he sighed, "Xuemore, quickly level up." He actually couldn't wait any longer. "Is it because of my identity as a heavenly cursed loner? Are you actually afraid of me?" Ning Xuemore usually hid her thoughts very deeply and didn't reveal them. But at this time, she was really drunk. In this half-dazed state, she couldn't hide her thoughts and unknowingly asked about some of her tangled thoughts. Shenjiuli was startled. So that's what she was thinking about. He looked down at her and didn't say anything. He only hugged her tighter. "Idiot, I, Shenjiuli, like someone. Don't say that you're a heavenly cursed loner. Even if you're a demon and my enemy, if I like you, then it's still like you." He carried her and slowly walked back to the Ning residence. The quiet streets, the girl in his arms, so what if the sky was filled with snow? As long as they were together, it would be a paradise. When they returned to the Ning residence, the servants were naturally busy again. A moment later, Ning Xuemore was already sleeping soundly on her own gums. Shinjiuli tucked her in. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he lowered his head and saw a gentle light slowly peeking out from her chest. His fingers paused, and he stopped moving. The gentle light grew brighter and brighter, and a flute gradually slid out from her arms. It slid forward bit by bit with the rise and fall of her breathing. The light was as gentle as the moonlight and not dazzling. Moonlight flute. Didn't she put it in her storage pouch? Why did he come out on his own? Shinjiuli's eyes fell on the flute. He watched it slide over Ning Xuemore's chest, shoulders, and finally slide down to her pillow. It glowed faintly under her hair. Ning Xuemore's brows furrowed slightly, but she didn't show any other signs of discomfort. She just gently turned her body, and then Na Xiao was squeezed under the pillow by her head. Shinjiuli reached out to pick up the flute, but he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He simply sat down beside her. He gently pressed his fingers on her wrist. Her breathing was very stable, and her blood vessels were normal. The flute under her pillow didn't seem to have any adverse effects on her. Was he overthinking? Was it just a coincidence that the flute slipped out? Shinjiuli sat beside her for a while. Just as he was about to look at the flute again, Ning Xuemore, who was lying on the pillow, suddenly tensed up and trembled slightly. She hissed softly, "Divine Lord, please be gentler." "Ooh, it hurts." Her voice sounded like she was in pain and pleasure. It was as if a young girl was having sex for the first time. Her face was faintly flushed. Shinjiuli was speechless. Chapter 1106. His expression changed, and he reached out to touch the space between her eyebrows. He had the ability to read people's memories, and naturally, he also had the ability to read people's dreams. If he touched her forehead, he would be able to see Ning Xuemore's dream clearly. Just as his fingertip was about to touch her forehead, he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He paused for a moment and then slowly retracted his hand. He remembered that the last time he read her memories, he had angered her and almost made her fall out with him. If he did not ask for her permission and she found out, she would probably be upset and say that he did not respect her. Forget it. It was just a dream, it was nothing. He just did not expect this little girl to have wet dreams too. The man in the dream was him? The Divine Lord. He was indeed called the Divine Lord many years ago. He did not expect to hear it from her mouth. Was it a coincidence? Or was she, the girl who had interacted with him before? Could it be that her dream was a dream from her previous life? Shinjiuli could not help but want to reach out his finger again. However, Ning Xuemore turned over and lay on her stomach, leaving only the back of her head for him to see. Shinjiuli was speechless. This position. Was she not afraid of being suffocated? Shinjiuli decisively reached out and turned her body over so that her face was facing up. He casually brushed the messy hair on her forehead to the side. His fingertip brushed past her forehead and did not stop. Since he had promised that he would never touch her privacy again, he would keep his promise. Perhaps it was just a coincidence that she called him the Divine Lord. After all, she had always called him the Divine Lord. Sometimes, she called him the Divine Lord. Sometimes, she called him the Great God. Perhaps she had mixed the two together in her dreams. He looked at her little face and saw that it was getting redder and redder. She was biting her red lips lightly, and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed. Her appearance made his mouth dry up in an instant. He could not help but lean down again and kiss her red lips. She moaned and actually raised her arms to hug his neck, passionately responding to him. It had been a long time since she had been so intimate with him. It was familiar, warm, fragrant, tender, and seductive. Her lips were as soft as tofu, tightly entangling him. Her delicate body was pressed tightly against his body, causing his breathing to instantly become heavier. The hand that was holding her shoulders tightened its grip. "It hurts," she whispered. "You're hurting me." Shinjiuli's fingers loosened slightly. Ning Xuemore suddenly pulled him onto the bed. Then, she turned over and pressed him underneath her. Let Let me do it. Shinjoli narrowed his eyes and looked at her as she sat on top of him. Her words were unclear, but her actions were not. Was she dreaming? Or did he wake up? He looked at her face playfully. Her hair was scattered on both sides of his face like a curtain. Her little face was flushed, but her eyes were still slightly closed. Was he still dreaming? Was she that ferocious in his dreams? This was the first time in his life that he was pressed down by someone. He was surprised and amused at the same time. He raised his hand to support her swaying body. He did not say anything and just watched her movements. Ning Xuemore did not open her eyes. After she sat on top of him and swayed a few times, she raised her hand to touch his collar that was always neat and tidy. She chuckled. You're buttoning it so tightly. You're such an abstinent person. It makes me want to strip you off even more, Shinjoli. Her little hand was soft and smooth as she tugged at his collar. Chapter 1107. For a moment, their rhythm was messed up, their breathing was messed up. Their skin touched and they could hear each other's breathing. His kiss and his fingers were everywhere, making her feel as if she was floating in the clouds, as if she was being roasted on a fire. She was sweating profusely, and her sweat seemed to carry the smell of wine, making Shinjoli almost intoxicated. He knew this was wrong, but she was too beautiful, making him unable to stop. His eyes seemed to be burning with fire, wanting to burn her into ashes and completely embed her into each other's bodies. In the chaos, Ning Xuemore's clothes were torn, and her body was almost naked. Shinjoli hugged her, his eyes were like rolling waves, wanting to completely engulf her. Dong, dong. Suddenly, there were two light sounds outside the door, as if someone was knocking. Although the sound was not loud, it completely shocked Shinjoli back to reality. He suddenly turned over, lying on the other side of the big bed. Then, he raised his sleeve, and a brocade quilt wrapped Ning Xuemore tightly. Who is it? He took a deep breath, calming his chaotic breathing. His hand brushed his body, and his clothes returned to normal. In a flash, he was already standing in front of the door. When the door opened, a cold wind whistled past. Outside the door, there was no one. The sound just now was clearly the sound of someone knocking on the door. How could there be no one? Shinjoli's figure flashed, and he was already floating in the air. He looked around, and his eyebrows wrinkled. It was already late at night, and the whole Ning mansion was silent. Other than the night patrol, there was no one else. The night patrol was a familiar warrior of the mansion, and they were all loyal people. Moreover, they were quite far from here, so it was impossible for them to escape so quickly. Did he hear wrongly? Shinjoli confirmed that there was nothing strange around, and then he floated down. He didn't set up a protective barrier, so the falling snowflakes fell on his body and head, making his boiling blood gradually calm down. He almost made a big mistake. Thinking back to the scene just now, he felt a little scared. Although the knocking sound was strange, it did him good and not bad. Perhaps it was the wind mixed with the snowflakes knocking on the door? He looked up at the sky. The red clouds were so thick that they looked like they were about to fall. Rumble. Another rumble of thunder came from the depths of the clouds. The sound was muffled and distant, but it rang clearly in his ears. His expression returned to its usual indifference and coldness. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he nonchalantly sat down in front of the stone table in Ning Xuemore's courtyard. He lowered his eyes and meditated. The snowflakes danced wildly around him, but not a single one landed on him. He sat there for a while and suddenly thought of something.